How Republicans just lost Generation Z. This, you know, one of the biggest bright moments of my days and you know, my life these days is watching these young people, you know, young people in their teens and 20s who are coming up in the world and are just saying, you know, we're not going to take it anymore. We are sick and tired of being shot at school. We are sick and tired of the minimum wage being at $7.25 an hour. We are sick and tired of not being able to join a union when we get a job at Amazon or Starbucks. We're sick and tired of not having health care. We're sick and tired of going into debt to the tune of, you know, enough to just lock out life opportunities just to get a damn education. Generation Z is awake, and they are having none of this Republican stuff that we kind of seem to put up with for most of my life. I mean, there was a lot of pushback to it prior to the Reagan Revolution, but you know, we've had 40 years now of basically Republican policies, even being enforced by a couple of Democratic presidents. And Bill Clinton and Barack Obama both did a lot of good things, but they also continued many Republican policies, many of these neoliberal policies. And these young people, the Generation Z, they're not having it. They know what neoliberalism is. They know what a failure it's been. They totally get it. I mean, after the shooting in Nashville last month, you had all these young people show up. I mean, it was all ages and all races and genders and everything else, you know, showed up at the Capitol building there, but there were a lot of young people, in part because 2 of the 3 legislators who were being expelled by Republicans were young people themselves. They were Zoomers also. Representatives Justin Jones and Justin Pearson. And now, you know, Republicans, now we've got, there's another shooting here now. This is, in Louisville, in a bank. Last week, Ted Cruz had made an offhand comment, apparently, about how, well, yeah, if we had more guns and people were in banks with guns, things would be safer. Right, so a guy buys a gun, walks into a bank in Louisville, kills 5 people. One of the police officer was shot in the head, is still in critical condition. Brilliant, Ted. Representative Jones of Tennessee, Justin Jones, said, your overreaction to his Republican colleagues, your overreaction, your flexing of false power has awakened a generation of people who will let you know that your time is up. And you could just see these old white Republicans in the Tennessee legislature sitting around going, yeah, right. They don't realize their time is up. There is a new generation coming up, and they are wide awake. They know what's going on. These young people are not buying the BS that's coming out of Fox so-called news, right-wing hate radio, and you know, all this stuff. In fact, just consider some of these statistics. These are 18 to 29-year-olds, right, which is Zoomers. 63% of them think that gun laws should be stricter. 70% of 18 to 29-year-olds voted for John Fetterman in Pennsylvania when they went back and looked at that election. In fact, across the nation in the 2022 election, of the Gen Z voters who actually showed up to vote, and they're starting to show up to vote in substantial numbers, 77% of them nationwide voted for Democrats for Congress. I don't think we've ever seen numbers like that on a generational basis. I may be wrong. I don't have the statistics for every generation, for every, you know, past, what, 50, 60, 70 years. But I don't, you know, I've been doing this a long time, and I don't recall anybody, you know, ever seeing a number like that. 77%, 87% of the students in Wisconsin who voted in the race for Supreme Court justice, 87% of them voted for the candidate most closely aligned with the Democratic Party, Janet Prez, however you say her last name, Judge Janet. And now that, you know, the leading cause of death for children in America is bullets, I don't think Gen Z is going to vote for a Republican for a long, long time. I remember the early 1970s, after Richard Nixon went down in flames and everybody saw how incredibly corrupt the Republican Party was, and said, you know, I mean, you know, there were, Kevin Phillips, I believe, wrote a book about it. You know, this is the end of the Republican Party. I mean, there were people thinking the Republican Party was just never going to hold power again. And then Jude Wanniski came along in 1977 with his two Santa Claus theory. And that just, like, you know, the sun opened up. Oh, yeah, when Republicans get the White House, and, you know, Reagan was the next one to do that, spend money like a drunken sailor, and then as soon as a Democrat comes in, and give huge tax cuts to the very, very rich, and then as soon as the Democrat comes in, starts screaming about the deficit caused by your tax cuts for rich people. They've been doing it ever since. They're still doing it. And now, to really, you know, put the screws to Generation Z, to Zoomers, you've got Republicans saying, hey, let's raise their Social Security retirement age, but don't worry for you older people right now who vote Republican. We're not going to do it to you. We're going to do it to these young people who vote overwhelmingly Democratic. That's going to endear them to the GOP, right? Remember in 2005, after George W. Bush got reelected, and he gave that speech where he talked about how I earned a bunch of political capital in this election, and I intend to spend it to privatize Social Security. And he went on it was going to be an over 20-city tour to promote the idea of converting Social Security into individual private retirement accounts administered by Wall Street banks. And after 5-6 cities, every time he spoke someplace, the idea of privatizing Social Security became less popular, and finally he gave up. He said, okay, that's it, screw that. And he started painting or something. I don't know what he did, but you know, we just went back to torturing people in Iraq and Afghanistan. But this is what they want to do. This is what Reagan did. See, I mean, somehow these guys think that Reagan's playbook will still work. In 1983, Ronald Reagan wanted to begin the privatization of Social Security. And so he did a couple of things. Number one, he made Social Security income taxable. Used to be you didn't pay income taxes on Social Security income. Now you do. You could thank Ronald Reagan for that. Number two, he significantly increased the amount of tax that you pay into the Social Security Trust Fund, but not for rich people. They put a cap on this, on the amount of money. Now, the cap goes all the way back to the origin of Social Security in 1935, but they capped it out in 1983 at, my recollection is it was around $40,000 back then. And, you know, it's risen up to, it's around $150,000 right now. But if you make more than $150,000 a year, and there's a lot of people in America who do, you don't pay a single penny on the additional income in taxes to support Social Security. Reagan could have fixed that. In fact, if he had done away with the cap, Social Security would be solvent forever. But
we say fight back!
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com.
Our book for the book report today is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, a Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhubuti. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions. Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president. These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Times op-ed, The Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police agencies across the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Roof told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the Civil Rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South, today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view.
Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services of Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated, quote, "A lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith," end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc. as riot is to blame the victim.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, it's a brand new week. Is the Hunter Jared story a sinister Russian and Saudi operation? What's going on here? My op-ed today is about this, and I want to share it with you. I did a real deep dive on this over the weekend. Also, is Jamie Raskin releasing a report, maybe today, certainly this week, about the millions of dollars that Donald Trump and his family pocketed from hotels, golf courses, etc., in other countries when he was president. Also, in the first hour of our program, a racist alert. The newest anti-woke is that different kinds of racists can't be friends. Say what? Also, Social Security turns 88 years old today. It's definitely eligible for Social Security, although if Reagan had had his way, if Rand Paul had his way, there would be no Social Security. All right. In the second hour of our program, I want to get into this Kansas newspaper raid. Fascism hits a small-town paper, and it appears over a sex pest chief of police. Really? Also, it looks like Judge Cannon is taking luxury trip bribes. What do we do about this? You know, the loose cannon down in Florida. And also, doesn't Matt Gaetz saying that we only through force can make any change in Washington, D.C., doesn't that disqualify him from serving in Congress? In the third hour of our program, a brand new U.S. basic incomes project is showing incredible signs of success. I'll share that with you. Also, Georgia prosecutors have texts directly linking Trump to a breach of voting machines in Coffee County, Georgia. Sure looks like it. In fact, it looks like probably tomorrow is going to be the day that Fani Willis makes her presentation to a Georgia grand jury about here's who you should indict and why you should indict them. Whether that will take just tomorrow and the indictments will come end of day tomorrow, or whether that will take a week and the indictments will come next week, nobody knows. But it looks like the process is beginning for real tomorrow. And finally, a good news alert. Alternative energy is arriving sooner than we expected here in the United States and around the world. I'll share that with you in the third hour of the program. But I want to start out with Hunter Biden and Jared Kushner. As you probably know, unless you've been living under a rock, Hunter Biden got a special prosecutor last week. Now, he has pled guilty to not having paid his income taxes for 2 years. He has since caught up and paid all the fines. And he pled guilty to applying for a gun license, a concealed carry permit, and checking the box that said, I am not addicted to drugs, when he was, in fact, addicted to drugs. Neither of these are crimes for which typically there is any jail. Usually both of these crimes, in fact, the tax one, more often than not, there's a small fine. The gun one, more often than not, nothing happens at all. But the Republicans want him to go to prison for these things, and now they've got a special prosecutor. And the reason why they want him to go to prison is not because of the gun charge and the tax charge, because they acknowledge those are minor offenses. They're saying they want him to go to prison because he profited off his father being vice president during the Obama administration. And the way he profited off that was by bragging about being the son of the vice president and getting his dad on the phone when he was working in Ukraine for Burisma. So, okay, they're saying Hunter made millions of dollars doing this. Let's assume that's all true. Now, first of all, there's no actual evidence that any of that is true. I mean, yes, he was working for Burisma and he made money, and yes, he did call his dad, but there's no evidence that Joe Biden intervened in any way whatsoever. And in fact, the one close to an intervention that Joe Biden did, which is where he fired the prosecutor who was looking into Burisma, he fired that guy because the guy was taking bribes from Burisma and was slow-walking the investigation, and he got replaced with a guy who actually did an investigation. So, I mean, the one thing that Joe Biden did was actually anti-corruption. Don't tell any Republicans that, their heads will explode, but anyhow. So the case that I'm building in this op-ed is 5 steps. Number one, that Jared Kushner leveraged his White House position to get a bailout for his terrible 666 Fifth Avenue investment. This could be a violation of federal law. Number two, that Kushner traded top-secret documents or information from the White House to help Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, take over Saudi Arabia and to excuse his murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and that Jared was paid $2 billion for his efforts. If true, this is a violation of federal law. Number three, that both Putin and MBS want Trump back in office so that Trump can end American democracy and make life easier for autocrats like them. And to that end, just a few weeks ago, they engineered a huge cut in oil production, which will show up at higher prices at the pump this fall and throughout next year. Number four, also to that end, Russia engineered the Hunter laptop scandal, which Republicans are now running with, like Benghazi, to try to tear down Joe Biden. And finally, also to that end of ending democracy in America, Saudi Arabia and other oil-producing Gulf dictatorships with aligned interests are financing the Trump family and thus the Trump campaign via the Live Golf Tournament and Trump's new billion-dollar real estate deal in Oman. So let's just go through this stuff, pretty straightforward. In early 2018, Jared Kushner needed about $1 billion or his life was going to go down in flames, his whole entire life. Back when his dad, Chuck Kushner, a professional con man, went to prison in 2005, a friend of the family who was a PR professional gave Jared some sage advice. This is a quote from Ben Walsh for Huffington Post. The fellow said, quote, "Step one, buy a New York newspaper. Don't be too particular. Any newspaper will do. Step two, buy a big Manhattan building. Any building will do. Step three, marry the daughter of a rich New York family. Anyone will do." Jared, now that was in 2005. In 2006, Jared purchased the New York Observer, a New York newspaper, for about $10 million. The next year, in 2007, early 2007, he bought 666 Fifth Avenue, and he paid a whopping $1.8 billion for it, showing that he knew nothing about Manhattan real estate. It was worth about half that. And then, in 2008, he hooked up, now that he was a serious guy owning a newspaper and a big building, he hooked up with Ivanka Trump and married her in 2008 and married her in 2009. So, he followed his father's friend's advice to the T. But by the time Trump ended up in the White House, this note on 666 Fifth Avenue was coming due, and Jared was panicking. I mean, the value of the building was appraised in 2010 at $820 million. Keep in mind, he paid $1.8 billion for it. No European bank, no American bank, not even Deutsche Bank would go near this thing. So Jared was reduced to begging from billionaires outside the United States. So he spent 2 long years, pretty much all of 2015 and 2016, with he and his father desperately negotiating with Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim Al Thani, also known as HBJ, who was the former prime minister of Qatar, and at that time ran Qatar's $250 billion sovereign wealth fund. Finally, when Trump got elected in November of 2016, in December of 2016, Jared Kushner invited HBJ to the White House, or excuse me, to Trump Tower during the transition period, and asked him again for $1 billion. HBJ said, we won't give you $1 billion, but we'll give you $500 million if you can get another $500 million from somebody else. Jared, it turned out, was not able to get $500 million from someplace else, so the deal fell through, and Jared didn't have any money, and again, he was looking at losing his $1.8 billion building and being completely bankrupted. So on May 20th, 2017, Jared Kushner had a secret private meeting with the leaders of Saudi Arabia. 3 weeks later, on June 5th, 2017, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt cut diplomatic relations with Qatar and blockaded that country to prevent the Qataris from getting food and other, essential supplies. Rex Tillerson was Secretary of State. He went nuts. He was like, holy crap, the Fifth Fleet, which patrols the Persian Gulf, is based out of Qatar. And suddenly Qatar doesn't have any food? Tillerson tried to end this, but then Donald Trump came out and said, yes, I support the blockade. Qatar went to NBC News and said, we believe this is a reprisal for our refusing to give $1 billion to Jared Kushner. Finally, a year later in 2018, Qatar gave in, and they backstopped 2 real estate deals for Jared Kushner. They gave him $184 million. They actually did this through U.S. proxies, but they gave him $184 million in May to refinance a Chicago building he had, and in August they gave him $1 billion to refinance 666 Fifth Avenue through a Canadian investment company. So, point number 1. Kushner using U.S. foreign policy to get $1 billion. Number 2, Kushner apparently gave Saudi Arabia's MBS top-secret information from the White House that helped MBS overthrow Mohammed bin Nayef, who was actually the leader of Saudi Arabia at the time in 2017. This young prince, and Nayef was in his 50s. He was 54 years old. At the time, Mohammed bin Salman was 33 years old, same age as Jared Kushner. And as the Jerusalem Post reported, quote, Kushner and the Crown Prince had a late October 2017 meeting in Riyadh. A week later, Mohammed began what he called an anti-corruption crackdown. The Saudi government arrested and jailed dozens of members of the Saudi royal family in a Riyadh hotel, among them Saudi figures named in a daily classified brief read by the president and his closest advisors that Kushner read avidly. According to the report, Mohammed told confidants that he and Kushner discussed Saudis identified in that brief, that classified presidential daily brief, as disloyal to Mohammed. In other words, Kushner took the presidential daily brief, which was top secret and he wasn't supposed to have, over to Saudi Arabia and gave it to MBS, who used it to imprison and even kill his political opponents and seize control of the country. Now, it appears that for this, Jared Kushner was given $2 billion. It's incredible, right? Just incredible. And this is just the beginning. Then we get into the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. Stay with me. I'll get to that in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Right back on the other side with, how Putin and MBS both want Trump back in office. Stay with me. And welcome back. Pearson in Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Pearson, what's on your mind today?
Well, before I give you my postulate, I hope that I'm being too negative, too upsetting by saying that when you just said seconds ago that what the FBI want with Putin, I'm hoping you meant to say what rogue elements within the FBI. Otherwise, we are in big doo-doo.
Yeah. What do you mean?
Okay, well, we all know that white infiltration has been a problem in both our military and law enforcement for decades.
Right.
I've been complaining about this to everybody and his brother I've known for decades.
Right.
So we have to assume that when police or FBI are not behaving the way we think in public, it's likely because they are white nationalists or KKK members or whatever.
Right.
So when you say what Putin and the FBI want, my thinking is what Putin and rogue
No, I
elements.
said what Putin and MBS want, what Putin and Saudi Arabia want.
I apologize. I misheard you. It sounded like FBI. I apologize.
Maybe I misspoke. But
okay, so anyway, we're both getting old. It's okay.
Yeah.
We'll cut each other slack. So I have an idea as to the reason behind the latest verbal diarrhea from you-know-who when he's talking about Fonnie Willis.
Okay.
Asserting that she's hanging out with gangbangers, she's supposed to be prostituting, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
My thinking is, and you could tell me if you agree or not, and your reasons why, I'm thinking that he's trying to get her angry to the point where she will say something in public that doesn't sound very prosecutorial. In other words, she may come shoot back at him, shoot back at him and say, "Oh, he's a pathological liar," blah blah blah, and then he and/or his lawyers have an excuse to make a public argument or in court that, oh, this prosecutor no longer can perform her duties prosecutorially, even-handedly. We need another prosecutor. So there's another excuse to delay.
And not just in court, Pearson. Last week, Governor Greg Abbott signed into law the legislation that allows him to remove any district attorney in the state of Georgia. And he has to have cause, he has to have some justification, but the justification is largely up to him. And so, using your theory, I would say that what Trump is trying to do is he's trying to provoke Fonnie Willis into doing or saying something unprofessional so that the governor, Brian Kemp, can remove her from office.
So my suspicion might be correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, God, I wish I were wrong. I really do.
I do, too.
We are in big, big trouble.
Yeah, I agree.
On a happy note, have a safe day. Remember, these morons have guns, and they think they have the right to vote.
Yeah, which morons are you talking about?
That vocal minority of Americans who are easily offended snowflakes.
Oh, Trump's base, the Trump humpers.
That's correct.
Yeah. They probably do, and they probably are. But I really think, Pearson, that their numbers are diminishing by the day. I realize every indictment, Trump's popularity goes up, but it only goes up with his base, and his base is shrinking. So
I hope to God you're right.
Yeah, I am right about that. Whether that's going to translate into anything meaningful in the 2024 election is a whole other thing. But that's for sure. Pearson, thanks for the call. It's 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day, and I'm going to finish up my rant here on the other side of this break. Stay with us. Back with you in 60 seconds. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, is waking up. And that's a really good thing. There's actually, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American Renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States. over at hartmannreport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. So back to my rant today. I was up to item number 3. Well, actually, I had just finished item number 2 about how Jared Kushner apparently gave Mohammed bin Salman top secret presidential daily briefs that MBS then used to imprison and murder his political enemies inside Saudi Arabia and consolidate his power. Number 3, both Putin and MBS want Trump back in office. Putin wants him back in office because it'll help him win the war in Ukraine. Trump will stop the war in Ukraine. MBS wants Trump back in office because, you know, he had a good relationship with Trump in the United States, and now he's kind of on the outs with us. And he's the world's biggest purveyor of fossil fuels, which are melting down the planet. So what did they do? Well, Saudi Arabia and Russia got together last month and announced a $2 million a day cut in oil production. Now, keep in mind, world production is only about 80 million barrels a day. So 2 million barrels a day is substantial. It's not going to have an immediately huge impact, but over the course of the next year, it's going to inch gas prices up to around $5.50 a gallon by the time the 2024 election rolls around. We saw this, you know, exact same thing happen back in 2016 when the Saudis cut oil to try to hurt Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. So you got that. Then number 4, to help Trump back in office, Russian intelligence put together the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. Marcy Wheeler over at emptywheel.net has dug through the contents of Hunter's laptop that Republicans have published. And it's pretty obvious what happened here. And there's, you know, open record reporting that, first of all, Hunter, when he was deep into drugs and alcohol, was using a Russian escort service to have sex with hookers. Those hookers would come to his apartment, have sex with him. He would sometimes get so drunk he would pass out. And apparently one of them had access to his computer or his phone because a Russian email address hacked his iCloud account. They then cloned his computer's backup, which was on iCloud, onto a new used laptop and dropped that off with this blind computer repairman who just happened to be buddies with Rudy Giuliani. This is a classic Russian disinformation campaign. President Biden has called it a Russian disinformation campaign. 50 U.S. intelligence officers have signed a letter calling this a Russian intelligence disinformation campaign. But the Republicans are running with it anyway. So it's just incredible. So, you know, there you go. This is what I'm seeing. What are you seeing in addition to this? I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Also, what Jamie Raskin is up to and a racist alert. Stay with us. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. This is from the introduction. Criminology on Trump is about family business, habitual lawlessness, and the struggle for economic and political power. The central character, Donald Trump, is a con artist, a master gaslighter, and a shrewd racketeer. It is the story of how the Houdini of white-collar crime and the founder and CEO of the Trump Organization operated a criminal enterprise from within an incorporated organization beginning in 1980 and continuing up to and from within the bowels of the White House for 4 years. At the same time, it's the history of the causation of the social, psychological, and physical harms connected to the Donald and his associates before, during, and after the presidency. This book is also an account of the activities that Donald Trump pursued in order to obtain the power of Commander-in-Chief of the United States, what he then did with that power of the bully pulpit once he achieved it, and finally the lengths to which he would go to keep from losing that power. Lastly, this is the story of what many elected and appointed politicos did or did not do to acquire or to forfeit their individual shares
of Trumpian power. This overall analysis of the underside of the rule of law begs the question, had the Donald not become the 45th president of the United States, would he, his children, or the Trump Organization have found themselves formal defendants and legal adversaries of the people of the state of New York? My answer unequivocally would have been no way. As of January 6, 2022, the question remains open as to whether Donald Trump, as the former president, or any of his family members will ever be indicted and prosecuted for criminal tax fraud and the other felonies, along with the Trump Organization, Inc., and its CFO, Alan Weisselberg. From the point of view of newsmaking, lawlessness, and equal justice, much of the popular discourse surrounding Trump has to do with competing narratives. The most reverberating of these has been the dueling apocalyptic narratives traversing both old and new media platforms alike. One narrative has to do with witch hunts, hoaxes, fake news, global elites, and the deep state engaging in a myriad of underworld and otherworld conspiracies to bring down Trump. The other narrative has to do with saving the U.S. democracy from authoritarianism, recovering law and order from the damage, chaos, and trauma of Trump, and restoring American normalcy without all of that political insanity. While these two narratives capture the cultural conflict, the diverse groups of people at work here and the rival social movements of incompatible interests, desires, and visions, neither speaks to the fundamental structural conditions that generate the divisiveness between these two narratives. Without ever addressing these structural relationships, the two sides will remain at loggerheads for some time to come. The medium is always, as always, is still the message. And so far in the 21st century, social media is the medium. At the same time, the weaponizing of racism, misogyny, hate, fear, intimidation, and violence vis-a-vis social media is neither new nor unique to the United States. These socio-cultural expressions of the contradictions of patriarchy, neocolonialism, and capitalism have been around since the nation's inception. Today's Proud Boys are the contemporary versions of New England churchmen in the 1700s, the Klan riders of the 1800s, or the fervent followers of Joseph McCarthy in the 1950s. Likewise, the anti-critical race theory politicians of today that do the bidding for white minority rule and racial discrimination are very much the same as John C. Calhoun fronting for the rich plantation owners during the antebellum South. The primary differences between the not-so-distant past of the last 75 years and the present have to do with the disbursements of the accumulation of capital. From post-World War II until around 1974, the United States experienced close to 3 decades of unparalleled upward social mobility, as well as a rapidly expanding middle class. However, since the mid-1970s to 2022, there's been a steady increase in economic inequality, a shrinking middle class, and downward social mobility for many. Thus, the contemporary bipartisan erosion of the liberal capitalist consensus in the United States is not the primary cause of our present democratic crisis, but it is rather symptomatic of a much broader problem that neither the Republicans, as a whole, nor most of the Democrats are willing to accept. The book, continuing, I'm referring to the inability of our bourgeois democratic system to resolve the contradictions of a political economy that promises the American dream to one and all and yet caters to the richest 1% and provides suitably for the upper 10%. In other words, our country's present-day conflicts over identity politics, government failures, neoliberal policies, right-wing intransigencies, and climate change not only predate Donald Trump and Trumpism, but they are all fundamentally driven by the unrelenting and expanding political economy of structural inequality. What makes this Trump book different from the others is that it is the only one grounded in the scientific study of crime and social control. Criminology focuses on the pathology of harmful acts and the cultural construction of both crime and punishment. The book is Criminology on Trump by Greg Broad. Greg Broad, by the way, is an expert in criminology. Those are my guests. Did Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. 34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Jamie Raskin, by the way, on Friday, or maybe it was on Saturday, I'm not sure, but it was in the last couple of days, said that he's the House Oversight Committee ranking member. Now, this is James Comer's committee. This is the committee that has had now, what, 3 blockbuster whistleblowers in a row who were all going to tell America that Joe Biden and Hunter Biden were taking bribes. And every single one of those witnesses came forward and said, no, we have no evidence whatsoever that Joe Biden was involved in this in any way. I mean, Hunter might have been a little skeezy, but, you know, he was not part of the administration, unlike Jared. But in any case, the House Oversight Committee, according to Jamie Raskin, says that a report's going to be released about the millions of dollars that Donald, Ivanka, and Jared have pocketed while they were in the White House. Ivanka, by the way, is already under investigation in multiple jurisdictions in connection to potential crimes from her habit of playing dual roles and double dipping. For example, she's being investigated for a tax avoidance scheme where she was both an official at the Trump Organization and being paid as a consultant. Now, if you're an official in the organization, you're supposed to be paid with a regular paycheck where they deduct your taxes. But instead, she got this, you know, tax-free as, or without taxes deducted as a consultant, so which is pretty skeezy, and I think, frankly, illegal. She's also being investigated for the apparently hundreds of millions of dollars that are still missing from the Trump inauguration fund. And she's a defendant in the Trump Organization criminal fraud case in New York State. So, FYI. Also, the anti-woke wars have now jumped the shark. This is bizarre. Down in Texas, there's this town in Texas, Conroe, Texas, where there's a group of women, they call themselves Mama Bears Rising, who have so far succeeded in banning 59 books in their local school district. And now they're going after, honest to God, you've seen this poster. I'm sure you've seen this poster. It's been around, geez, for 30 years or longer. I mean, I think this poster might even date back to when I was a teenager. And it's a poster with a picture of 6 or 7 kids' hands, you know, one hand holding the wrist of the next, and then that hand holding the wrist of the next, and creating a circle. And each hand is a different race, or a different darkness of skin, as it were. And, you know, what it symbolizes is that people of different races can be friends, and the kids of different races can be friends. Well, Melissa Duggan and Misty Odenweller are quite upset about this. In fact, Misty says it's a violation of the law to have a poster like this in the public schools. And Melissa Duggan says it's a display of personal ideology in a classroom. Since when did the idea that kids of different races can be friends become personal ideology? I thought that was normal. Anyhow, this is part of a well-funded nationwide effort, Amanda Marcotte writes over at Salon.com, led by a group of interlocking far-right groups aimed at destroying modernity, undermining democracy, and imposing authoritarian government against the will of most Americans. One of the leaders in this, according to the New Republic, is the Claremont Institute. This is, by the way, the right-wing think tank where John Eastman works. They've promoted the work of Kostin Alamariu, who has declared that the liberation of women is, quote, an infection that requires, quote, the most terrible convulsions and most thorough purgative measures. A frequent contributor to Claremont's online journal, Amanda writes, argues that, quote, men and women should not work together in the same spaces. This guy's got a problem, right? I mean, you know, this is, geez, what, an incel?
And he describes the Black Lives Matter protesters of 2020 as, quote, hideously ugly, malformed people. Another guy associated with Claremont, blogger Curtis Yarvin, argues that, quote, America needs a king, a dictator with total military power. Right. Oh, my God. Where are we heading? All right, let's pick up your phone calls here and find out what's on your mind today in this dead of summer. Andre in Chicago. Hey, Andre, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing today?
Good. What's up?
Hey, what I want to say, Tom, is you can give me your opinion on this. It seems like to me when you look at this attempted murder charge in this 1-6 committee investigation, you got the weapon, which is the hangman's gallows, and then you got people openly saying hang Mike Pence, but yet there was no attempted murder charges brought against anyone. Could you comment on that and tell me why do you think it is that the Blagojevich was impeached and removed from office without 14 years, but Donald Trump has did all this stuff and he's got no time yet? Can you comment on those two things?
Yeah, I'm with you, Andre. I am hopeful that this is going to be one of the biggest shoes that drops when Jack Smith does his indictment, because somebody conceived of that gallows. Somebody designed that gallows. That gallows was professionally made. I mean, it was put together with 4x4s and 2x4s and long bolts and a very professional hangman's noose. That was not some hastily thrown together, hey, let's put a rope on a tree kind of thing. And it had to take more than one person to put it together, and there have to be pictures of it. And I haven't heard one word about that gallows. And so I'm hoping that that becomes part of Jack Smith's indictment. It certainly should be. You're absolutely right. This was attempted murder, or at least the intent to attempt murder, and should be prosecuted. Andre, thanks for the call. Great question. Great question. Grant in Everett, Washington. Hey, Grant, what's on your mind today?
Good day. I wanted to share with everyone that in Butte County, California, in the watershed where Paradise is, there was just a levee break that silted Butte Creek, which is one of the last homes or protected areas for the endangered spring run salmon that have to go into the cooler pools throughout the summer and wait until the fall so that they can spawn. Mm-hmm. And during the absolute low water, the levee break has silted that entire creek. So the salmon are toast. Because it's not really getting, there's...
oh, that's grim.
Will be and much, we'll say fish kill. Yeah. A mass killing of an endangered species that we're trying to bring back from the edge.
Yeah, we're seeing the same sort of thing happening up here in the Pacific Northwest. A lot of these rivers and streams that were, salmon habitats, not just because of the dams and things, but because of the warming of the water, have become inhospitable to the spawning salmon or the young salmon. And it's
the overnitration from people's lawns. All the little pieces of the puzzle add up. Either we can add them up to a beautiful picture, or we can take them and throw them away so that we have just a patchwork of what used to be, and maybe not even that.
You're absolutely right. And not only that, this is going to affect the health of the forest. Stuart Pym was on this program maybe 5-6 years ago, the famous biologist. And he was talking about how many of the trees that live in the forests in the Pacific Northwest are species of trees that require iodine to grow. But there is no iodine in the Pacific Northwest. And the way that they get this iodine is that the bears eat the salmon out of the river and then poop in the woods. The salmon bring the iodine up from the ocean, and then and then gets cycled through the bear poop into the soil, and then that's the iodine source for the trees. And so if you kill off the salmon, the bears aren't eating salmon, they're not pooping iodine into the woods, and the trees start getting rust. The trees get weak and they start getting fungal diseases, and then they die off, and now you've got tinder, you've got another wildfire.
So it's like this is the importance of understanding that everything is part of something else. You know, that everything is connected. The web of life is a web of life. It's not, you know, little standalone, you know, islands of life. So excellent point.
And I'd put that it's kind of our responsibility for the stewardship, which also puts in place the need for the maintenance of many aging facilities, be it our electrical grid, or be it the where we take water from the rivers and how much they're considering.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. And our hydro systems. And our hydro systems as well. Grant, excellent point. Thank you. David in North Miami Beach, Florida. Hey, David, what's up?
Hey, y'all. Greetings, Chicago and beyond. Yes, part of my run for mayor here, if we're going to be at the mercy of the Jared Kushners of the world and the MBS, then in the short term, I have figured out a way for us to get a universal basic income, but ultimately it's about getting our Fifth Amendment rights to life and liberty. I mean, we have how many homeless and semi-homeless and how many empty apartments and office buildings? So ultimately, we might have to use the AOC concept of housing vouchers and food vouchers as more work is automated, outsourced. I mean, there needs to be a new movie called 187, not as the code for homicide. That's how little an hour you can make delivering food. Because I know you want to see the factories. I'm afraid the factories, when they make a comeback, will be like the Twilight Zone episode where it's a robot holding a pocket watch in an empty cafeteria with no workers.
Yeah, no, I get that, David, and you know, one of the things that, you know, as productivity goes up from robotics, corporate profits go up, and corporate taxes should be going up, and that money should be then recycled back to people through a universal basic income. And I'm going to get into that at some length at the top of the second hour here, because you're absolutely right. David, thank you for the call. It's 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Helping you win the water cooler wars, Thom Hartmann here. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Their news. Back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. And let's see here. Susan in Caldwell, Idaho. Hey, Susan, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I came into your program a little late because you have a good competitor here in my market, the 1A program on NPR. And they were touching on the police raid on that Kansas newspaper. I don't know if you touched on it, but
I'm going to dig into that at the top of the second hour.
Okay. Well, their guest was the executive director of the Kansas Press Association, and you know she's touching on aspects of the story that the CBS and NBC are covering. This was a paper covering some contentious local politicking in their community. But not only was the newspaper raided, the home of the publisher raided, their computers and phones confiscated, but a fellow city council member was also raided, and this hasn't been mentioned any other outlet that I've looked at, and I've looked at the AP and the New York Times, and I think that is a profound uptick in what's going on over there.
Yeah.
Just wanted to touch on that.
And it looks like the thing that might have provoked the raid was that the paper had received several credible suggestions that the police chief had left his previous job because of sexual harassment, something that the town didn't know.
Yes, and that they do. Yeah, the AP has touched on that as well. That the paper was looking into this police chief's previous employment history. That was true too. Yeah, it's just very disturbing. The AP did mention though another disturbing story. You know, this is all since that stabbing in Las Vegas of that reporter by an official who did not like his coverage. This little paper never published anything in the
That's right.
of the information
none of
they
these
were
stories
receiving in
were
this
published.
issue here.
Yeah.
But in New Hampshire, in the last election cycle, the Attorney General of New Hampshire arrested a newspaper editor for publishing political ads and neglecting to write a political ad. You know, that little parenthetical insert they put. Somehow that got left out in the print edition, and she had to go to jail.
Wow.
That's also interesting. Yeah.
Wow.
That's the AP story from yesterday.
I didn't know about that. I'll have to look that up. That's an incredible story. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the tip, Susan.
Thank you, Tom.
Yep. Arnold in Roxborough, North Carolina. Hey, Arnold, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
I don't know if you covered last week. You know, I got to listen to your show not all week long, but that incident that happened in Montgomery, Alabama, on the riverfront loading dock. I mean,
you're talking with the white guys beating up the black security guard.
Right. Well, he was a security guard. He was the co-captain of the riverboat.
Oh, that's right.
Touring.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. What happened?
Yeah. No, I didn't. We didn't cover that story. It was more of a visual story, and you know, we're more radio. But you know, it did get good coverage on the national news, I thought.
Yeah, I thought so too. But what I thought, I mean, it came to me, you know, like you was just a minute ago with a guy talking about the environment, you know, connecting all the dots. Now.
Plus, they're arresting some of the white guys who beat him up now, which is the good news.
Oh yeah, that's good news. But what I'm saying though is that this thing happened again once before in Huntsville, Alabama.
Oh really?
Trump was down there campaigning in 2000 for the 2016 election. He got into the crowd, got the crowd all jazzed up, talking about Colin Kaepernick and the football players are kneeling.
And they beat up another black guy.
No, what happened?
I got to run, Arnold. I'm sorry. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting progressive talk radio, and tag you're it. So we have this major culture war going on in the United States. You've got Republicans, they're trying to ban books. Not just trying to, they're actually doing all of these things. Banning books, banning trans girls in sports, you know, attacking basically the entire queer community, you know, whatever they can to try to sow division and hate, promoting Nazi memes, talking about how, you know, Jews are paying to have black and brown people replace white people and all this kind of stuff. Why are billionaires doing this? Why are they funding these people? I mean, billionaires don't care about crime. They live in gated communities with private security. They don't care about public schools. Their kids go to private schools. They don't care about public transportation. They fly in private jets. Oh, yeah, that's right. If they can get us fighting against each other, if they can get us hating each other, we will ignore their efforts to cut their taxes and deregulate their industries. There's a whole video about it at tom.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Michael in Bronx, New York. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hi, Tom. We are from the Bronx, but I'm vacationing right now in Cape Cod, Massachusetts.
Oh, sweet. How's the weather?
Oh, it's nice and refreshing. We had a couple of thunderstorms, and it's like right now it's mixed clouds and sun, but it's the kind of weather you want to go.
That's great. It's going to be 100 degrees or more here in Portland. In fact, it's 83.8 degrees in our studio right now. So, 'cause the building's air conditioning failed. So I'm sitting here drinking water and, yeah. So anyhow, what's up, Michael?
Be very careful, my friend.
I will.
Well, I take issue into Trump's recent statements and threats, and my recommendation, but especially with his saying, you come after me, I'll come after you. You broke the law. You committed multiple crimes. So, of course, authorities will come after you like they will come after any other criminal suspect. Let's get that straight right there. And as far as I'm concerned, him making a threat like that, that's another crime level against authorities. So that should be another count. And then this rant, before I go into the latest rant, I think the authorities like Fani Willis and Jack Smith should turn that statement around to him and say, you come after us with that kind of threat, we'll definitely come after you.
Yeah,
And
well,
then
they are doing that, Michael. They're just not saying it out loud. I mean, you know, saying it out loud could be problematic, particularly if Fani Willis says it out loud, because Georgia Governor Brian Kemp just signed a law that gives him the power to remove Fani Willis from her office if he thinks that she has gone too far. So she's going to be, in fact, she issued a memo last week, to her entire staff saying Donald Trump is going to do everything he can to provoke us. He's going to be calling us names, particularly me. You have no need to defend me. Please do not defend me. Do not make public statements. Don't even go on social media. Don't take the bait. So she knows what she's doing.
Because
this woman is smart.
She knows what she's doing. Is smart and knows that actions speak louder than words, and they'll make their statements through their legal actions. And when Trump turned around and told that reporter, you should ask a wise guy question, you Mr. Wise Guy, I wish he would say that to me, calling me a wise guy. My response to him said, you calling me a wise guy? You're damn right I'm a wise guy. Much wiser and much smarter than your dumbass.
Yeah, I get it. Okay, Michael, thank you. Steve in Katy, Texas. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hi there. Just one thing, two things. The first thing, real quick. Conroe is a little redneck community about 40 miles north of Houston. A lot of people actually, Woodlands is between there and Conroe, but a lot of people commute from there into Houston to work.
Right. This is the town where they where they tore up the newspaper office you're talking about.
No, that's the town where I think it was on your show. They announced that women were, two women were successfully banning books in the community.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm mixing up. That was in Kansas where they went after the newspaper. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so
can't keep my fascists straight.
Seems like there's a nationwide institute that trains policemen, all the way from minor malfeasance to murder, and then the police administrators are trained how to, pretend they never saw anything and put things off or, use excuses. And they all use the same script. I've been seeing this a lot over the last few weeks on YouTube, and all the rank and file policemen, if they want, they know they can just, all they have to do now is say, I'm detaining you, and they'll slap handcuffs on you, and if you flinch, they say you're resisting arrest, and they'll either take you into jail or they'll beat you on the spot. So I mean, they got all this training to know how you could beat somebody up and get away with it.
I know. You see it on TV on the cop shows. I mean, they're being trained by television too, which is terrible. Which is absolutely terrible.
I know, they can watch YouTube because it's the same script. No matter what the offense is, or they pull you over and people ask, "What are you pulling me over for?" They say, "Oh, look at him! Get out of the car."
Yeah. No, I'm with you, Steve. Thank you for the call. Tough stuff. All righty. Kansas newspaper raid. I'll tell you about that on the other side of the break. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Business by Christopher Leonard. This is from the prologue. It's titled The Hidden King. Nobody ever visits the stranded little community of Waldron, Arkansas. But even if they did, a tourist would never see the place for what it really is. Most outsiders would be fooled into thinking it was an actual small town. On any given morning, the residents awaken and begin their routine along Main Street. Old men park their pickup trucks by the curb in front of the Rock Cafe, which opens early for breakfast. As the cafe's booths and tables fill up, a congregation of old-timers in cowboy hats gathers in a loose ring of aluminum chairs out front, smoking and talking and stubbing out their cigarette butts in a bucket full of sand. Later in the morning, Chambers Bank in the south end of town opens up, and the tellers cheerfully greet customers by name. On Thursday at noon, the livestock auction opens in a cavernous barn on the north side of town, drawing crowds of ranchers who haul steel trailers behind their trucks, with cows staring out between the horizontal slats. In the late afternoon, teenagers park their cars by the gazebo south of the auction barn, proudly displaying their Mustangs and Broncos like big game trophies. These events have a rhythm of their own, the clockwork functioning of a small-town economy. But it's all just window dressing. All of it would cease to exist in a moment and have no impact whatsoever on the true Waldron or its true economic reason for being. The real tempo of the town's economic pulse is measured by the coming and going of semi-trucks that roll down Main Street at periodic intervals, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In the middle of the night, tanker trucks full of animal feed rumble past the empty stores and out onto country roads that lead into the hilly terrain that surrounds town. At dawn, other trucks trundle in from the hills, heaped high with battered metal crates full of chickens that exude clouds of white feathers along the highway. The tempo can be measured in the regular arrival of train cars full of grain and oil seeds that dump their loads at a feed mill that clanks and hums and churns all night. And in the parade of refrigerated trucks that pull up to a slaughterhouse near the feed mill and get loaded with pallets of frozen meat. This is the real functioning of Waldron, Arkansas, and its true reason for being. This is the heartbeat of Tyson Foods, the nation's biggest meat company. The Tyson plant on the north end of Waldron is the only thing that keeps the town on the map. Appropriately, many residents simply refer to it as the complex. That's because the Tyson plant isn't just a factory, it's more like an entire small-town economy consolidated into one property. The complex contains its own feed mill and hatchery, its own trucking line and slaughterhouse that covers several acres of land and processes about 1 million dead chickens a week. The complex is like an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses, an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses that used to define a small town like Waldron, the kinds of businesses that were once the economic pillars of rural America. Of course, tourists to Waldron would never see the Tyson plant, and not just because it sits on the north fringe of town away from Main Street. Visitors are stopped at its front gate and forbidden from exploring its grounds. So a tourist would have to be content to stroll along the sidewalks downtown, observing the fake Main Street, the deceptive array of little businesses that make it seem like a community. This illusory appearance cloaks Tyson's existence all the way from its roots in rural America to the grocery store shelves and restaurant menus where its products finally reach American consumers. The average shopper is usually fooled when he or she peruses the meat aisle, seeing what appears to be an abundance of choices and products. Tyson brand name wouldn't necessarily stand out with its logo gracing just a handful of products. But the rotisserie chicken slowly turning in its oven, the Bonisi brand pepperoni, the Lady Astor brand chicken cordon bleu, the frozen chicken pot pie, and the Wright brand bacon all come from the same company, Tyson. And then there is all the unlabeled meat that Tyson floods into the U.S. food system every day. The meat served in cafeterias, nursing homes, fast food restaurants, and suburban eateries where more and more Americans eat their meals. There's a very good chance any of the meat purchased in these places was made by Tyson. Even if Tyson did not produce a given piece of meat, the consumer is really only picking between different versions of the same commodified beef, chicken, and pork that is produced throughout a system that Tyson pioneered. Tyson's few competitors have resorted to imitating the company's business model just to survive. This book aims to explore the vast hidden territory between the remote farms and towns like Waldron, where Tyson raises millions of animals, and the final point of contact where consumers buy the company's meat. Unseen between these two poles is a hidden power structure that has quietly reshaped U.S. rural economies while gaining unprecedented control over the nation's meat supply. Just a handful of companies produce nearly all the meat consumed in the United States, and Tyson is the king among them. The company sits atop a powerful oligarchy of corporations that determines how animals are raised, how much farmers get paid, and how meat is processed, all while reaping massive profits and remaining almost entirely opaque to the consumer. Because Tyson and its imitators are based in the geographic and economic fringes of America in forgotten places like Waldron, the company has managed to escape the scrutiny it deserves. While Tyson's operations are remote, the company's business practices affect virtually everyone. About 95% of Americans eat chicken, which means they almost certainly eat chicken produced by Tyson. And then it goes on from there. The book is The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Industry by Christopher Leonard.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the second hour of our program. I'm just ordering a fan here online because it's 84.2 degrees in the studio right at the moment. All righty, Kansas cop raid newspaper office to avenge drunk lady and alleged sex pest police chief. That's the headline over at Wonkette.com. A great summary of it. All 5 members of the Marion County Police Force, Marion, Kansas, excuse me. Marion is a small town in Kansas, town of about 4,000. Well, actually, the newspaper has a readership of about 4,000 people. I don't have the size of the town. They not only raided the newspaper and took all the computers, but they also raided the private home of its publisher and seized his computers and his mother's computers. His mother is the co-owner of the newspaper. This is a guy, by the way, who was a professor of news. He taught news for years. He retired back to his hometown and bought this newspaper to save it from being bought up by one of the big hedge funds. You know, half of all the small newspapers in America right now are owned by 2 New York City hedge funds. So here it is. They seized his computers. They seized his mother's computer. They seized his mother's phone, which was his mother's 98, which was her emergency thing. And she got so freaked out by this that she fell over and dropped dead. I mean, it just, you know, he says it was because of the stress. They took the cell phones from the various reporters. Now, this all started when a couple of the reporters from the Marion County Record had tried to attend a meet and greet with a local Republican congressman. And this was at a restaurant owned by, it's called Carrie's Kitchen by Carrie Newell. And Carrie asked the reporters to leave. Well, we don't like you liberals here, you newspaper people. So the newspaper published an article saying we got kicked out of a Republican congressman's event. And in response to that, they got an anonymous tip that the restaurant owner had a DUI back in 2008.
and was concealing it because the restaurant owner, Carrie Newell, wanted to get a liquor license for her restaurant, and you can't get a liquor license if you have a DUI conviction. Now, the newspaper did not publish this story. In fact, they suspected that it came from her husband because they are in the middle of a divorce, Carrie Newell and her husband, and an acrimonious divorce, and they just didn't want to get into it. So when they didn't publish this, they got another tip that the police chief, who had left his job someplace else and come to Marion County to be the police chief, had left his previous job because he had been, his name is Gideon Cody, and he's brand new, that he had, in his previous job, been fired or quit because he had been charged with sexual harassment. So here you've got a corrupt, or allegedly corrupt, restaurant owner in tight with the Republican establishment, and a sheriff who has apparently been accused of sexual misconduct or sexual harassment. And the newspaper is sitting on both these stories. They had not published either of these stories. But apparently the sheriff didn't want them published, and so the sheriff went to the Marion County District Court Magistrate Judge Laura Villar, V-I-A-R, and said that they were accusing the newspaper of identity theft and unlawful acts concerning computers. They didn't present any evidence of identity theft or unlawful acts. But this judge, probably also part of the Republican establishment in town, authorized the search warrant, and now, the co-owner of the newspaper is dead. And, there is a law against this. There is a federal law, goes back to the 90s, as I recall, maybe the 80s, that says that police may not execute search warrants to get material that newspapers have that might contain sources and information, that instead they have to subpoena that. And the subpoena has to be enforced by court order. And then if you defy the court order, then they can issue a warrant. So it's a two-step process. But that's not what was done here. They note, this is from a story at Wonkette, as I mentioned, they note that ever since Cody was hired by the town, the record has been inundated with calls from his former co-workers saying that the reason he retired from his previous job was due to an investigation into sexual misconduct. The publisher of the paper said, we had a half dozen or more different anonymous sources calling about that. Well, we never ran it because we could never get any of them to go on the record, and we could never get his personnel file. But the allegations, including the identities of who made the allegations, were on one of the computers that got seized. Oh, isn't that sweet? So now the police chief knows who was making the allegations that he, oh my God. This is small town intrigue, but it's small town intrigue that seems fascist to me. I mean, this is how fascist countries operate. This is what you would expect to happen in Viktor Orban's Hungary or Vladimir Putin's Russia. The role models for today's GOP. Speaking of role models for today's GOP, Clarence Thomas, of course, and we talked about this last Friday, 38 additional vacations that we know about. There's no doubt more beyond that. Rich guy pays for his $250,000 RV that he says, I'm just a man of the people. And now they're flying him all over the world. Literally one billionaire sent his entire private 737 jet, to pick up Clarence Thomas and bring him to a party and then take him back home again, him and his wife. Well, apparently Clarence Thomas ain't the only one. Judge Cannon, Luce Cannon, the woman down in Florida who's got the Trump documents, national security, violating the Espionage Act case, who is just going out of her way to give Trump everything he wants, every delay, whatever. Well, it turns out that she's getting gifts too. She's getting luxury trips to, in this case, it was to a colloquium seminar in Montana back last September. She's a Federalist Society member. This was organized apparently by Leonard Leo. And it was taught by Todd Zawitsky, who is a professor at George Mason University's Antonin Scalia Law School and a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, which started out its life as the Charles Koch Foundation. Brilliant. The Guardian has a whole story about it. Another corrupt judge, only this one is presiding over Donald Trump's trial. Incredible. And finally, Matt Gaetz. I mean, you know, speaking of fascism, if you're detecting a theme here, it's because there is. Matt Gaetz introduced Donald Trump in Iowa yesterday. Trump showed up. He was only there a couple hours. He came in, he did some ranting and raving, hopped on his plane, went back to Florida. And Gaetz got up and basically said, we need to use violence to change the government in Washington, D.C. Now, that is not a call that I have ever heard from a politician in America before. That was literally Hitler's explicit call. In Munich, he tried to seize the Bavarian state capital by force with his crowd from the beer hall putsch, and that didn't work out. They ended up throwing him in prison. And then, of course, you know, his entire 7-year reign was just, you know, one violent act after another. But that was that's what Matt Gaetz had to say yesterday. He said, Mr. President, I cannot stand these people that are destroying our country. They are weaponizing our federal law enforcement against patriotic Americans who love this nation as we should. We love standing with you, but we know that only through force can we make any change in a corrupt town like Washington, D.C. What the hell is Matt Gaetz talking about? Is he calling to hang Mike Pence again? Is he calling for the assassination of members of Congress, of his peers? Is he calling for, you know, the Trump humpers to come out and lay siege to the Capitol building again? Is he calling for another bomb to be planted at the RNC and DNC headquarters? We, by the way, still don't know who the bomber was. I mean, what kind of violence is Matt Gaetz calling for? And why aren't more Americans asking that question? When an American politician says the solution to problems in Washington, D.C. is violence, you need to sit up and take notice. This guy should be censured. This guy should be kicked out of Congress. I mean, you know, it was enough that he was hooking up with underage teenage girls down in Florida with his buddy who's now in prison for that. And somehow they cut him a pass on it, decided not to prosecute him. But what is this man doing in Congress? This is wrong. I mean, this is beyond wrong. This is how it begins, as they say. Calling for violence, explicitly calling for violence, the use of force, explicitly calling for violence as a solution to political problems? You know, we didn't used to do that in America. But this is where Donald Trump has led us. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It is 17 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls on the other side of this break. And welcome back. Estelle in Morongo Valley, California. Hey, Estelle, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I have to take a minute to just be so grateful for you. You're just amazing, brilliant mind, brilliant heart, and your care and concern for the planet and all of us is inspiring.
Well, thank you. I couldn't do it with the whole team here, you know, with Louise and Sean and Nate.
To your team as well. Yeah. Hats off and kudos. And to your dear callers. And may I say that $1, $2, $3, $4, $5, and anything you can manage, send it to your local stations, to your free speech television station, to your radio station. You know, this program is non-paral. there are other programs who try their best and they do great. But Tom, there's no one like you, well, and I'm totally grateful for you.
Thank you, Estelle. Be careful. My head, I don't want my head to swell up here. So, but you didn't call about that. You called about Maui, right?
and to Grant and I think it was Grant and Everett Washington brought me to tears about the silt in the waterways, and to all of you who bring stories that I've never heard before. I'm shaken. I'm heartbroken. I'm elated. I laugh at some of these things. This is a program that we need to have everywhere. It's what's going to help. So the particular reason that I called this time, and by the way, at 92, I'm still listening to you, Tom.
Oh, bless you,
and watching you. And I want to say that I don't know if you brought this up before, but in Maui, that certainly climate crisis, was a huge part. But everything fell into place. The lush Lahaina, the lush Maui that stood from time immemorial, not through the climate crisis, but through so many other traumas. And the diversion of water to be taken to large swaths of land used for pineapple and sugar growing and mansions and cattle and things that were not the Hawaiian Islands were so much a part of this. The electric company who didn't discontinue the electricity. Yep. And I didn't know if you brought this up, but when I talk to people about this, they say, "How did you know that?" Because it's not on the news. The reason for this, then there was a reason. It could have been probably avoided a lot, and I wonder what you thought about it, Tom. And so many thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Estelle. That I believe that power company is a for-profit power company. I'm not 100% certain. I do know that the ones on the Big Island are for-profit power companies, and at least one of them on Maui is a for-profit power company, because we have friends who live there or acquaintances that we visited there many years ago, and they were very upset because the for-profit power company was making it very, very hard for them to put solar panels on the roof of their house. They were fighting the net metering thing. So, if it was a for-profit power company rather than one owned by the people, it would have been operated with profit first rather than people first. And that might be why they didn't shut off the power, because, hey, they wanted to squeeze another 8 hours of profit out of it. I can't say that for sure, Estelle, but that would be my guess. Estelle, thank you for the call. Thanks for your kind words. You're 2 years younger than my mother-in-law, who listens to this program, too, and she's sharp as a tack, too. Hey, Gwen. Estelle, thank you. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So back in 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt became president, we were in the depths of the Great Depression. He raised the top income tax rate on billionaires from 25% to 90%. The ultra-rich were screaming, and here's what he had to say.
A number of my friends who belong in the very high upper bracket have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am re-elected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
He just took it right to them, right? Now, what came out of that was the world's largest and fastest growing and first major middle class. We can do this again. We just have to raise taxes on rich people. It's pretty straightforward. There's a whole article about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. "23 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Amazing. Well, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Katie in Hudson, Massachusetts. Hey, Katie, what's on your mind today?
Mass, yes. Well, driving around through New England and especially up in New Hampshire, you see, Trump signs and Trump stickers and Trump this, and I have this incredible urge to just carry a Sharpie around with me. And every time I get anywhere near a sign, just scrawl across in big black marker, rapist, thief, traitor.
Yeah.
And if there's enough room, lock him up, because I just feel like that. And then I thought, maybe I should go by a Trump office and gather up. They'd be probably more than happy to give me a bunch of bumper stickers, and I can pre-deface them and then stick them up randomly.
There you go.
But I don't know if this is legal. Is this legal?
It's perfectly legal to deface Trump stuff as long as you own it. If you're defacing somebody else's property, that's, criminal mischief or vandalism or, depending on the local ordinance.
Sure. But if I have these stickers, if I end up getting a bunch of the bumper stickers from one of their offices,
yeah, you can.
In the last election,
you can deface them however you want. Yeah, and stick them on.
I can stick them.
Maybe you can stick them on other. I think probably sticking them on other people's cars might be a.
No, that would be a bad thing.
Yeah.
No, I would not do that.
That would be
vehicle. But,
too far. Yeah.
Telephone poles and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because I just feel like when I see his name, I'm just instantly rapist, thief, traitor.
Yeah. Well, that's what he is.
That's what he is to me.
I mean, he's been convicted of rape. He's been convicted of stealing from people. His fraud conviction with Trump University.
Well, I'm thinking the documents more than all his other thievery.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Well, good luck with that, Katie.
Okay,
thanks for the call.
Maybe we'll have a movement.
Okay.
We'll see.
There you go.
See those
Okay.
all over the country.
There you go. Okay, thank you. Steve in Park Ridge, Illinois. Hey, Steve. Thanks for listening to WCPT. What's up?
Hey, I was recently overseas, and I have a healthcare story that I think your listeners will enjoy. So on the flight, I start developing a little skin rash. By the time we get to Bergen, Norway, I'm telling my wife, this is like a root canal. It itches so bad. I just have to have care.
Oh,
so one thing leads to another. And I go to the local hospital ER. I don't think I was there more than an hour. I was promptly seen. The only thing I had to present was my Illinois driver's license. And I walked out of there with a prescription and a cream prescription. And 2 blocks away, guess what dawned on me? I was never charged a penny.
Right. Yeah, it was Norway. It's free. Healthcare is free.
Right. Well,
isn't Bergen a beautiful town?
Oh, it is. But I just, that whole experience of, we know that the Scandinavian countries, we're also in Denmark, have the reputation for being such a happiness index in that survey country. And in talking to some of the locals, when you consider they have universal health care, affordable college, no
free
guns, free college, etc., it's no wonder.
Yeah.
So I was just amazed.
Yeah, there's a show on CNN about this guy who's trying to find why all these countries are happy, and he goes and he asks them about their philosophy and all these things. He never once asks them if their happiness has anything to do with free healthcare, free college, low-cost housing, high levels of unionization. Never once, which just blows my mind. Steve, thanks for sharing that story. That's brilliant. Thank you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back, 27 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program, defending America from the weapons of mass deception.
We're reading today from Truth in Our Times by David E. McCraw, Deputy General Counsel of the New York Times, the number 2 lawyer for the New York Times. This is from Chapter 1, titled Election Day. It opens with a tweet from Donald Trump. The failing New York Times has been wrong about me from the very beginning. Sadly, I would lose the primaries. Oh, said I would lose the primaries on the general election. Fake news. November 8, 2016. At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan remained in doubt, but the reality was sinking in.
Donald Trump was on the verge of winning the American presidency. I'd been in newsrooms on election nights before. I know how it's supposed to be. The only thing that ever mattered was the horse race, think Gore-Bush, or the historic moment, think Obama-McCain. There was no investment in which candidate was winning. He or she was destined to disappoint in the long run. And the dominant emotion was a certain not quite cynical detachment amid the electric buzz of the vote count and projections and the anticipation of relief that the endless push of the campaign was finally over. Sure, you couldn't ignore the victories or the big picture moments, and the day after stories would be celebratory in their way, duly restrained but with a nod to victory itself, not unlike the next day account of a Super Bowl game or Game 7 of the World Series. Capture the triumph for a night or relish the race too close to call. Leave the dancing and crying for others, for the believers. But this night was like no other election night. There had been an investment, not just journalistic, but spiritual. Donald Trump had campaigned not just against Hillary Clinton, but also against the New York Times and the American press, the mainstream American press. And his astonishing rise to the top of the Republican Party had been built on his near daily attacks on facts, on the very idea that facts matter. For journalists who approach truth like a secular religion and who have seen 1,000 times how a single true story could gut the political career of a lying politician, it had been a year of faith-shaking disbelief. A line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. The shock was palpable as the numbers came in, laced for some with the fading hope for a different outcome among people who generally wanted nothing more than a story worth telling. And there was still a paper to put out, a reckoning to account for. It was too much on an already long night. I slipped away. At the elevators, I ran into Sue Craig and a guy who was obviously not from the Times. Sue had broken one of the biggest stories of the campaign. She was the one who went to her mailbox one day in September and found pages from Donald Trump's tax returns in an envelope. She introduced me to her acquaintance. He had once worked for Trump. I didn't ask why he was there. Like me, Sue had decided to get away. It's too weird here, she said. We all got on the elevator. Sue, who had written a devastating story about Trump, me, whose letter to Trump's lawyers had lit up the internet for a week in October, and one of Trump's guys. We rode in silence, a strange tableau on the strangest night of the year. 14 hours earlier, as I came into the building, the Times security guard had called me over. They wanted to make sure I knew about the plans for the next morning. In the quirky ways that things happen at the Times, I had become the lawyer to see for all the things that security guys encountered, from the intruder who pilfered women's shoes to the anonymous letter weaponized with razor blades. The Times was printing thousands of extra newspapers, and tables were going to be set up outside for all the people who would be showing up to buy the New York Times for posterity's sake. The headline, I later learned, was going to read, Madam President. We had been caught flat-footed 8 years earlier when Barack Obama had made history. By the time I arrived for work early in the morning of the 2008 election, the line was already starting to snake down the sidewalk. Soon there were hundreds of Obama supporters who thought, and why wouldn't they, that the place to buy a copy of the New York Times was surely at the New York Times. Lots of things happen at the Times building. Selling newspapers is not one of them. Employees were pressed into emergency duty to cart bundles of newspapers from the Times printing plant in Queens, and the long lines outside the building stretched on into the afternoon. But it was Obama's victory in 2012 that was on my mind this morning. I vote in a neighborhood that is predominantly black and middle class. In 2012, following a drumbeat of stories about how Republicans hoped to suppress voter turnout, I walked into my polling place at a local school 8 minutes after it opened. The line already extended back to the schoolhouse door. Did y'all sleep here, a guy wanted to know as he stepped into the foyer. On this morning in 2016, I had arrived before dawn. I was the only one in line at my precinct's table. That all seemed like a strangely distant memory as midnight approached. I had made my escape from the building with Sue and the Trump guy. At home, I sat alone in the glow of the TV screens as the states that mattered fell into place for the Republicans. I turned it off. Donald Trump was about to become president of the United States. The next morning, in a light drizzle on a gray November day, the newspaper sales tables were set up outside the building as planned. No one stopped. The vendors sat idly amid the stacks. There was no Madam President front page. Instead, the headline read, Trump triumphs, and the first two paragraphs of the lead story talked about how the vote threatened convulsions throughout the country and made an early mention of those who had watched with alarm the rise of Trump. Nearly half the country had voted for the man. I had just spent a weekend in October back in rural Illinois, in my hometown. And for a moment, I allowed myself to see the coverage through the eyes of the rest of America, where, at least for this one night, his victory represented a certain kind of hope that change was going to come at last. Truth in Our Times by David McCraw.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmanReport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Gavin in New York City. Hey, Gavin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you feeling?
Good. What's up?
All right. Yep. First, let me say I tend to lean to the right, so I might be a bit of a novelty.
Okay. I like callers who lean to the right. It's always interesting conversation.
No problem. I think that what's happening now in terms of the discourse is that initially the idea of Trump becoming president on the left just seemed so ridiculous that it was just like pushed off like this could never happen. Mm-hmm. And I think what is happening this time around is like there's this almost, I don't know how to describe, almost like a mania about this idea. But I'm telling you from the right that this is not going to happen.
What's
because,
not going to happen?
Trump becoming president again, it's not going to happen.
Oh, I agree with you.
That's not going to happen. And like, I'm not telling you this as like, I mean, I supported him the first time, but at the display on January 6th, we cannot, I mean, because we love the country more than we love any party. And I would assume that everybody has, or most of us have that kind of ideology. Like we just kind of have a position where we feel like this is what I think is best for the country that we all live in. It's not
I get it. The Trump base is shrinking. I mean, he lost by 3 million votes in 2016, the popular vote. He lost by 7 million votes in 2020. I think if he runs again, he'll lose by more than 10 million votes.
At this point, it's a cult of personality.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
And, that's not real. So more than likely, Joe Biden is going to win. Like, I mean, aside from, like an Obama-type black horse coming out of somewhere. Mm-hmm. And another thing with Trump is you forget he was running against Hillary Clinton. Like, it's not very hard to defeat Hillary Clinton in the national election.
She was not the most popular Democrat. I'll give you that.
Yeah. The question I have, though, is all things considered, we're going to reelect Biden, right? So how do you feel about Joe Biden 5 years from now? Like, how do you feel about his ability to govern 5 years from now? And I think that's probably the only real caution that I think that's a reasonable caution.
No, it is.
To know your thoughts on
it
that.
is. I mean, he'll be, 86, 87, something like that 5 years from now? Or 85 anyway. Some people are significantly impaired by that age. Some people aren't. I mean, my mother-in-law is 94, and last year she went out and built a patio with 25-pound paving stones all by herself. I mean, she's sharp as a tack. Some people can deal with age well, and some people don't. But if he is impaired by age, or God forbid something even worse, then what we have to look at, Gavin, are the people he surrounds himself with, and in particular his vice president, Kamala Harris. And I think that she's done a very good job so far, and I think that her values certainly align with mine. I'm guessing they don't align with yours, but I believe that she cares about this country. She wants what's best for this country and for the majority of people in this country. And he's put together a cabinet. I mean, you look at Trump's cabinet. He had grifters. He had several billionaires who were, complete ideologues who had no interest in the average person. He had Betsy DeVos, who wanted to destroy public education. He had Wilbur Ross, who Forbes magazine called a grifter, as the Secretary of Commerce, and cutting deals for himself and other. I mean, it was a freak show.
I will definitely give Joe Biden credit for that. I don't know about him necessarily individually, but I will commend him for at least putting together an administration that is not a distraction.
Yeah.
I will give him credit for that.
I agree.
Everybody seems to do their job.
So, Gavin, my question for you, you say you lean to the right. What does that mean? Give me a couple of issues where you and I are on opposite sides of the issue.
I believe that we have a responsibility to Americans, I believe that it is in our interest to provide businesses for people. I believe that we should encourage a system by which business opportunity is flourishing, as opposed to where I will kind of meet you on is the corporatization of the country is a bit gone too far. And I think we need more emphasis on small businesses and on entrepreneurship and on farming and on also mainly the ability for people to represent their lived experience as they choose to live it, regardless of how.
Well, how can you be a Republican then? I mean, the Republican Party since 1983, when Ronald Reagan officially stopped enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Clayton Antitrust Act, and the Antitrust Law of 1956, has fully embraced nothing but big business and largely abandoned small business. You know, if you're old enough to remember, I have no idea how old you are, but back in 1980, when Reagan came into office, the majority of malls and downtowns in America were filled with small local businesses. I used to run one of them. And now, you know, malls and local small towns are all, you know, national chains. There's, you know, small businesses are pretty much dead outside of a, you know, in occasionally small town America. But that's just fine with the GOP.
And I'm not a disciple of Reagan as a saint. I'm not a disciple of that.
So what makes you say that you lean to the right? What I'm hearing so far makes you sound like a Democrat.
No. Because I believe in the virtue and the liberty of the individual.
So do Democrats.
And maybe it's just bad marketing. But it seems to becoming like the Democratic Party, and even though I'm influenced by it all around, I live in New York City, it seems like a bit of groupthink. And it seems like there's
both parties engage in groupthink. Come on. That's not a political position, Gavin. That's an observation about human nature.
I might have picked a set of groupthink that I seem to agree with, so maybe I'm a victim of my own ideology.
So what is the groupthink that you agree with? I'm still trying to figure this out.
I believe in the groupthink of individualism.
What does that mean?
And I think that I feel like especially... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, does that mean we shouldn't have a social safety net? Is that are you doing the libertarian thing of Charles Koch?
No. That's madness. That's madness. That's this whole every man for himself is madness. We do have a government for a reason, but I do feel like, especially on the left, the government tends to overstep, and the government tends to kind of impede. Oh man, Tom, you're really breaking me down here.
No, I'm just trying to understand, Gavin, why anybody would say that they lean to the right. What's an example of government overreach in terms of caring for we the people?
I understand. I would say this: the process of setting up a business in New York City versus Georgia is very different.
Oh yeah, I've done both.
The amount of I guess regulation, for lack of a better word, that is necessary here, I feel is a bit much, and then the cost becomes like exorbitant. So what it is like I'm in a position where it's not for me to leave here, even though you can make more money here in the long run. But just it seems like the process and the administration that is associated with this kind of politics, it seems to be overwhelming, and so it seems to be discouraging.
But don't you, and you know, I understand what you're saying. I owned a business that was based in New York City for 3 years, 1980 to 83. It was called Langley St. Clair Instrumentation Systems. And this was back in the early days of computers, and we were importing computer parts mostly from Taiwan, some from South Korea, and selling them by mail, direct mail. We had the back cover of Byte magazine every month, I guess it was monthly, for almost a year. And you know, and we did a couple of trade shows, and the trade shows were a pain in the ass, because if you show up, just try to carry a box into the Javits Center, the union stops you and says, no, you've got to put that on a cart and we'll haul it for you and we'll charge you $250. You know, that got me thinking, you know, unions have gone nuts. But that said, New York City is huge. I mean, you got 20 million people living there. You're going to have a whole lot more administration and frankly rules than in small town America. You know, Louise and I started a business in Vermont that was, you know, pretty much regulation free. But, you know, it was in a town of 10,000 people. I mean, who are you going to hurt without everybody knowing about it? I still don't see where that is a left-right divide, frankly.
Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. Maybe because, like I said, I do believe that ultimately, I would hope that both sides have an interest in the progress of the country.
Yeah, me too.
And I do believe that while each side might be zealous in their own beliefs, I do believe that ultimately both sides have a belief that we just want the country to do well. And I think sometimes when we get to the fringes, it becomes us and them a bit.
Yeah.
Like even when we were dealing with the Trump people, it's becoming a bit us and them with that. But also on the left side, when we get to these far reaches where, especially like in social issues and stuff like that, it becomes a bit, is either you go with this or you're bigoted, for lack of a better word. And I think that a part of freedom, I'm sorry?
For example, you go with what? Or you're bigoted?
I think that the main problem that the Democratic Party has right now really revolves around social politics and the willingness to not understand that there are religious people in this country who have conservative values, and while they're willing to respect someone else's liberalism, it seems like there's a lack of willingness to respect conservative values.
Well, okay, here's what my take on that. If you are opposed to abortion, great, don't get an abortion. If you want to pray every day in school, great, pray in school. If you want to teach your children that, you know, there's God or Vishnu or whatever, feel free. But where I draw the line is when Republicans come to me and say, we're going to prevent you from getting an abortion because of our beliefs. We're going to prevent you, a gay person, from getting married because of our beliefs. We're gonna force your school to teach your children that the world was created in 6,000 years because of our beliefs. And that does not seem to me like freedom. That does not seem to me like American values. And that does not seem to me at all consistent with what you were just articulating, Gavin.
I understand what you're saying, but I mean, from my side of it, it sort of seems like there is, as much as you would say, like, someone is trying to enforce religion on...
Well, give me one example. I just gave you 4.
Okay, Mr. Hartman.
How am I imposing my religious beliefs on you, Gavin? Give me one example, or how the Democratic Party is imposing any religious belief on you. Please, one example.
Okay. I will respectfully... I'm going to go ahead and think about that.
You're going to ponder it.
Maybe we can chat again in a few weeks.
Okay. I look forward to it, Gavin. If you are the Republican Party, or let me rephrase that. If you are a Republican, the Republican Party needs more people like you. And thank you so much for a calm, respectful conversation. They are sadly rare when conservatives call in. So thank you very much. I look forward to future conversations. It's 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And it's now 85 degrees in my studio. I'll be right back with you. And welcome back. Mary in Mulkytown, Illinois. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today? Where is Mulkytown, Illinois?
Hey. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, great. Do you know where Carbondale or Southern Illinois is?
I do. I've been to Carbondale.
Saluki? Yeah, it's like 30 minutes from there.
Oh, okay. I know where you are.
Yeah, so it's a small little town.
Yeah, down in the southern part of the state, right?
Just have a post office here, so.
Yeah. So what's up?
But I'm a first-time caller, and yeah, I really love your show. I learned a lot. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I had a question. I learned something when I watched a video yesterday from Ruth Ben Gaetz or whatever.
You're saying it right.
So, yeah. So she had mentioned something, and I looked it up. Do you know about this report from the the TexasGOP.org, the report of the Permanent 2022 Platform and Resolutions Committee?
No, I don't.
Okay. So, and I was just wanting to know about this. So this one thing they put in there, it says, we reject the certified results of the 2020 presidential election, and we hold that actor Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. was not legitimately elected by the people of the United States.
Was
we strongly
not?
urge. Yes.
Okay.
And is this legal?
Well, anybody's entitled to an opinion. I mean, you know, the First Amendment guarantees that, including political parties. They can say whatever they want. What's not legal is if they try to do something, you know, about it in a way that violates the law. I'm guessing, though, just having it as a party platform is just fine.
Oh, okay. So the fact that it's a resolution and a platform is not illegal.
Yeah. Excuse me. I just I inhaled some saliva. No, it's not illegal. It would be illegal to put it into law, or you know, not legal to put it into law or whatever, or to do something about it. But simply for a Republican Party, and I'm guessing they're probably not the only one, to say, you know, we believe Donald Trump rather than the federal government, or we believe Donald Trump rather than Joe Biden. You know, that's within their rights.
Okay. And then so since they have it in their resolutions on their party platform, so they can't really legally enforce it or do anything like that, right? They can't.
I'm not sure how they would try to enforce it. I mean, if they do something like the Republicans did in Coffee County, Georgia, where they crack open the voting machines and you know, try to change the outcome of the election, then they've committed a crime. If they try to interfere with the ability of Democrats to vote, then they have committed a crime. You know, there's a bunch of things that Republicans did in the 2020 election that were crimes, and they're going to come back and haunt them. Already are. I mean, you've got fake electors, for example, in 2 states that have been indicted, and probably more to come. So, you know, there are some actions that they could take that would be criminal, you know, based on that assertion. But just making the assertion, there's nothing illegal. Frankly, nothing even. I mean, I was going to say nothing wrong with that. I think it's a shame. I think it's unfortunate when you basically lie to people and presumably know that they're lying. I mean, 60 court cases. Bill Barr, the Attorney General, coming out and saying there's no there. I mean, the only person who's basically promoting this lie in a big way is Donald Trump. So, Mary, I got to run.
So this is just their belief?
Yeah, they're asserting their belief. That's it. Mary, I got to run, but thank you for the call, and hope you call again. Thank you. It's 51 minutes past the hour. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. .53 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Matthew in Orlando, Florida. Hey, Matthew, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I've got 2 subjects for you. I don't know if we got time for both. I'm going to let you choose which one. First problem is that we're reaching some sort of critical mass on information management for just understanding Trump's indictments. I have a business idea where we create an application that gives people enough information to keep track of all the names. Because my view is that the current existence of politics is that it's an advertising and debate strategy. And that if you can arm a certain population with the right debate things to say against the right things, then you end up winning these small mini debates. Well, if I had an app that could keep track of all the things going on, that perhaps I could confront someone who's a conservative with a strategy and information that could be easily accessed. Because in the end, it takes a full-time job to understand this level of political complexity.
It really does.
And the other thing is that I'm really pissed off at the I guess it was Gaetz was saying that he's calling for revolution, etc. And
he said he's calling for the use of force, to be precise.
Use of force. Well, there's a whole world of people who realize that we think we should have some form of massive structural change. And it's generally coming from the climate change universe. When you look at the complete failure of representational government to protect us from climate change, you go, wait a minute, the problem is that. Representational government in its current form just simply doesn't work.
Well, no, hang on just a second, Matthew. It's not that representational government doesn't work. It's that corrupted representational government doesn't work. And this began in 1976 when conservatives on the Supreme Court, for the first time in the history of the United States or any other democratic country in the world, asserted that if billionaires give large quantities of money to politicians, so much so that those politicians do pretty much exclusively what those billionaires want, that is no longer to be considered political bribery or corruption, that is now, henceforth, forever, world without end, amen, to be considered free speech and protected by the First Amendment. And then 2 years later, in a decision written by Lewis Powell himself, of Powell Memo fame, in a case called Boston versus Bellotti, the Supreme Court doubled down on that and said, by the way, this applies to corporations too. Corporations can now legally bribe politicians. And, by the way, can legally bribe Supreme Court justices. And that was the beginning of the current crisis in American democracy. So it's not democracy, it's not representative government that's the source of this crisis, Matthew. It's the legalization, after 100 years of criminalizing this behavior, it's the legalization of political bribery.
I hear you, and that is absolutely correct. But the failure of organizations of all type to plan for long-term consequence, that the basic structure of the system does not look to long-term. Everything's on the short-term basis. And climate change is the long-term issue, but problematically, and the group that I have arisen from has found mechanisms that are showing climate change to be ridiculously quick and incredibly stabilizing on everything. And it's like, you look at the science for that long enough, you get out of denial and you say, wait a minute, how many years do we have to keep society together? Right. What are we going to do with this? Yeah. Do we have 10, 20, 50 years? Even if you say that you're generous, you say, well, we probably got 50 years. What should we do with 50 years before we are completely extinct? Or so, civilization so hobbled that, the issue of, driving around your SUV is a joke. Right. So it's like there's another way to look at revolution other than through this fascist lens.
Okay, you got 10 seconds. What is it?
Well, it's called direct democracy. We need to take decision-making away from representatives and increase the ability of the people to make decisions by like using a Facebook interface. We could run the place better than these guys. We can do it.
I get your passion for that, Matthew, and it's the essence of why we have ballot initiatives, for example. On the other hand, ballot initiatives can be corrupted with enough money, which gets us back to the corruption. But okay, Matthew, thank you. Thank you for the call. We'll pick up on the other side of the break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Is corporate
We say fight back!
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
The New Global Battlefield by Robert, I believe it's pronounced Latif, L-A-T-I-F-F. This is from the introduction. On a sweltering August day following weeks of heightened tension with Russia over its actions in Ukraine and Syria, and harsh words between the United States and China over actions in the South China Sea, and as workers are preparing to depart the cool of their air-conditioned Manhattan office buildings for the gridlocked highways and subways, several large electric power plants along the East Coast simultaneously experienced dramatic overspeed conditions in their large turbine generators. Plant operators are unable to stop the steam turbines, whose automatic control and data systems have been infected by sophisticated computer malware, and they catastrophically tear themselves apart, cutting power to large segments of the population and industries in the Northeast. Building systems shut down, hospitals switch to emergency generators, trains stop running, traffic lights cease operating, and Wall Street trading comes to a halt. At the same time, 1,100 miles to the south, a massive rocket sits fueled and ready to launch a critical national security satellite when an explosive-laden private aircraft flies at low altitude into the Cape Canaveral launch pad area and, despite repeated warnings, slams into the pressurized fuel tank and solid rocket motors, creating an enormous conflagration. Half a world away, elite commandos equipped with the latest high-technology equipment but unidentifiable as a national army attack U.S. and allied interests near areas of disputed territory. Thus are fired the opening shots of a new war. These hypothetical events represent a radically different style of conflict fought with new tools and against new and unfamiliar enemies. When most people think of war, they imagine soldiers doing battle with other soldiers, employing tanks, artillery, and other recognizable weapons. However, in this century, war has morphed into something we can scarcely recognize, and future conflicts will be qualitatively and quantitatively unlike those. They will be fought using innovative and unusual weapons, many of which, because the technologies have both civilian and military uses, will be available to far more people who are far less skilled in their employment. The so-called democratization of technology has diminished the monopoly of advanced countries on the tools of war. 21st century armed conflicts often have no battlefield in the traditional sense. The concept of opposing armies clashing in deadly struggle but moderated by international conventions of behavior seems a thing of the past. In 1999, Chinese colonels Kuo Liang and Wang Shuangshui predicted that soldiers would increasingly be computer hackers, financiers, drug smugglers, and agents of private corporations rather than members of a military, and that their weapons would include not only airplanes, cannons, poison gas bombs, and biochemical agents, but also computer viruses, net browsers, and financial derivative tools. Their predictions were prescient. Yesterday's wars were, like World War II, about saving civilized nations from maniacal dictators, or like the conflicts in Vietnam and Korea, devoted to a clash of ideologies in the attempt to limit the spread of one hegemon over another. They were big affairs involving large military forces and enormous violence. Today's wars are more about cultural and religious hatreds, using violence as a means to change the hearts and minds of people, among whom the killing occurs with more frequency. Tomorrow's wars will be different still, fought largely for political dominance with stealth and cunning, targeting innocents and institutions, heavily dependent on information superiority, and employing strange new weapons. While we have a highly motivated and well-trained and equipped armed forces that will adapt, we are not prepared as a nation to react well to the inevitably messy and ambiguous situations these new conflicts and weapons will present. We still have no clear idea of what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace now, nor of how we might respond to such an act. It is not enough for the military to be prepared. Neither the public nor its decision makers have yet fully comprehended the significance of the changes in the types of conflict and the tools with which they will be fought. Without question, there will be circumstances when decision makers will find it necessary, or at least think it necessary, to send soldiers into classic boots-on-the-ground combat situations. We will continue to project force with our powerful aircraft, our munitions, and our aircraft carrier strike groups. When war is fought in foreign lands, it could well be against other high-tech armies. However, war will increasingly be more personal and often fought closer to home. It will not lend itself to the traditional massive displays of U.S. firepower. It will affect individuals directly, not as some distant conflict we read about in newspapers or watch in the movies or on the internet. Americans will be targeted on U.S. soil, often, as we have seen in San Bernardino and Orlando, by homegrown terrorists. This form of war will be messy and complex, and it will not lend itself to easy, quick, soundbite solutions. It may not even be clear for a while who perpetrated the violence against us. Was it state-sponsored or a random act of terror? Will we unleash massive destruction on foreign countries in retaliation for attacks by terrorists residing on our own soil? If so, to what end and with what consequences? There are always consequences, whether they be the death or capture of our own troops, unnecessary civilian casualties, or the incitement of more violence. The book Future War by Robert Latif.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. 6 minutes past the hour, and well, the beginning of a whole brand new third hour here, and a lot to talk about. One of the things that has become a thing in America, for lack of a better word, over the last 20 years, I believe as a consequence of the neoliberal policies that Ronald Reagan put into place in 1981, and that were continued not just by Reagan, but also by Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama, and that are being now challenged by Joe Biden. But nonetheless, we've had 42 years of basically neoliberal policies that reduce the income of working people, reduce the ability of people to form unions. In fact, we went from basically a third of America being unionized to, less than 10% of America being unionized during that period of time. 2/3 of Americans having the equivalent of a good union job, because union jobs set the local wage floor, down to 45% of Americans being in the middle class now. It was over 60% when Reagan came into office. It's now 43%, according to official numbers. And what's happened as a result of this, in addition to the bottom, not just the bottom half, the bottom 80% of America losing its footing, losing its bearing, losing its ability to buy a new house and to take a vacation every year and to buy a new car from time to time. The kind of signals of middle class life. One of the responses to this, actually, let me finish this thought before I get to the response. There are a number of factors that are driving this. One, as I mentioned, is neoliberalism, the destruction of unions, the moving offshore of over 15,000 factories and 17 million good union jobs that are now in China and Malaysia and Mexico. The destruction of the labor union movement. The
the consolidation of American business. In 1983, Ronald Reagan notified the Department of Justice, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Federal Trade Commission that they should stop enforcing the three antitrust laws that we have on the books: the Sherman Act of 1890, the Clayton Act of 1929, I think it is, or maybe it's 1918, and the Antitrust Act of 1956. Stop enforcing those, and his administration did. It stopped enforcing them. And the result of that is that it's very difficult for young people starting out now to do what Louise and I did with our lives. I mean, starting when I was 21 years old, I started my first business. And, we've started and built up and sold off 6 or 7 businesses in the 51 years we've been married. And, our philosophy was we were going to take our retirement in pieces throughout our life. And we've done that. We build a business, sell it off, live off that money for a year or 2 or 3, run out of money, start a new business, build it up for a year or 2, sell it off. I mean, this is literally what we've done all these years. You can't do that anymore. I mean, you can, but it's awful, awful hard now. The small businesses that used to be the backbone of America are largely gone. Family-owned businesses, the local dry cleaner shop or the local restaurant or the local hotel or the local bank or the local furniture store or the local electronics store that you would, start in your town and then hand down to your kids and grandkids and was typically named after somebody, Woolworths or whatever. Those are gone, by and large. And along with them, and along with good wages, today in 2023, in order to maintain what was a middle-class lifestyle the year that Ronald Reagan came into office, 1981, requires 2 incomes. In 1981, you could do it with 1 income. In 1957, my dad, I remember I was 6 years old. My dad got a job in a tool and die shop that was unionized. And prior to that, he had been selling World Book encyclopedias and Rexair vacuum cleaners door to door, and we were poor. It was me, my brother Steve, my brother Stan was born during this time, so it was, 3 kids and mom and dad living in a 1-bedroom house. It was a 2-room house. There was 1 room that was the living room, kitchen, dining room, and 1 room that was the bedroom, and it was just a little teeny tiny house on Cleveland Street in Lansing, Michigan. And because Dad wasn't making that much money selling vacuum cleaners and World Book encyclopedias door to door. But when he got that union job, that was his entree into the middle class. And by the time he died, he had bought his house. He bought a new house. He took a vacation every year. He bought a new car every 2 or 3 years. He was able to put his kids through school to the extent that any of us took him up on that. I mean, that was the middle class, with 1 single paycheck. From the 1950s all the way, and when he died, and when he retired, he had a pension that along with Social Security gave him a really nice lifestyle. Well, today, if you want to have that same lifestyle that my dad had or that Louise and I had as we were going through the years of our marriage, today you have to have 2 jobs to do that, and in some cases even 3 jobs. 1 person working 2 jobs, 1 person working 1 full-time job, to just maintain that same standard of living. So the result of this is that, average Americans are extraordinarily stressed out. And the percentage of us who are living in poverty has gone from being, in the neighborhood of around 30% of us, back when 66% of us were in the middle class. Then you got, in addition, you got the top 2 or 3%. It has gone from around 30% of us to around 50 or 60% of us, because now only 43% of us are in the middle class. So we've got all these additional people living in deep poverty, and as rents are going up and as food prices are going up, and inflation and everything else, but also, with the rents, it's the commodification of single-family housing. Now you've got, these giant hedge funds that are buying, half of all houses in America last year were sold for cash. And the majority of those that were sold for cash were sold to institutional investors or foreign countries. I realize there are some boomers who have accumulated enough money that they can buy houses for cash, but they're in the minority. So the question has become, what do we do about this? We can't just instantly create enough jobs. And, I had a caller in the last hour said, well, if we revive, Biden is building we're building factories now in America at a faster rate than we literally ever have, than we have since the 1950s, ever have in most people's lifetimes. But those factories are going to be heavily automated. There's going to be a lot of robots. Supermarkets, the checkouts are all automated. I had a trucker call in last Friday who was talking about how his trucking company is looking at having the lead truck have a driver, and then behind that is 2 trucks that are on automatic pilot. They just follow the truck ahead of them wherever it goes. And, 3 times as many trucks and 1/3 as many drivers. What's going to happen? So increasingly, the solution to this that is being offered is something called Universal Basic Income, UBI. And this is being experimented with in countries all over the world, but it's also being experimented here in the United States in more than 100 communities. And one of them is the subject of a great piece by Timothy Pratt in The Guardian, theguardian.com. It takes place in Georgia. And it's being run by, now there are similar projects in Rochester, New York, Ann Arbor, Michigan, in Philadelphia, but this one's in Georgia. And it's Stockton, California, by the way, did the same thing. In fact, the mayor, Michael Tubbs, it was such a success that he went on to found Mayors for a Guaranteed Basic Income. So the way basic income works is everybody who has an income below a certain level, and in this case, in the Georgia example, it was income below $29,000 a year, which is 200% of the poverty level. Everyone who has an income below that level, who qualifies, who gets into the program, they capped it at 650 women, and this was a group that specifically wanted to do it for black women. So this was 650 black women who were poor. That each one of them got, I believe it was $850 a month. Yeah, $850 a month for 2 years, no strings attached. You can do anything you want with the money. Now, Republicans will tell you if you give black women free money, they're going to go spend it on drugs, right? I mean, I've been hearing this from Republicans my whole entire life. This goes back to Ronald Reagan talking about the welfare queen, or black people in general. But in fact, that's just racist BS. So they're 1 year into the project right now, and this is what they found. Slightly more than half the women have now saved some money. None had any money saved at the outset of the project. 3 times as many women have been able to afford childcare. The share of women whose cell phone service was interrupted due to unpaid bills dropped from 60% to 40%. In other words, these women are doing well. This is being run by the Georgia Resilience and Opportunity Fund, the GRO Fund, and Give Directly, which is a national group that gives money to guaranteed income projects in the United States. And I think that this is, basically this is what Social Security is, right? You pass a certain age, and guess what? You've got a guaranteed basic income. I would call it, in fact, instead of calling it guaranteed basic income, I'd call it Social Security for everybody, or for everybody who makes less than a certain amount. That if you live in America, and it's predicated on this argument that Teddy Roosevelt made in 1912 when he was running for president again on the Bull Moose Party ticket and talking about the square deal. And that was that in the richest country on earth, nobody should live in poverty. Not everybody can work. Not everybody's even willing to work. But having people live in poverty hurts our country. It hurts all the rest of us. So you come up with a fairly minimal amount of money, and you give that. And by the way, we just had a big test of this just in the last 3 years with the child tax credit, where everybody in America who had kids all of a sudden was getting $600 a month free money. It was a guaranteed basic income. And what happened? The poverty level in America dropped by 20%. Now it's going back up.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Yeah, because Republicans cut off the program or refuse to renew it in Congress, our poverty levels are going back up. So I just want to put that on your radar screen. And welcome back. Gar in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Gar, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom? I want to add a little bit on that basic education. Andrew Yang, that's what he ran on. He said the reason why we can do that is because we should be making money off our data. And data is the oil of today.
You're right.
Your data. In other words, he said that's why Alaska, they're already doing it with oil.
Yeah.
But they said data is the oil of today, and that's why they should be able to do it, because everybody got data, and they selling it back, to everybody.
Yep.
But what I called about was Jimmy Carter, President Carter. Now, he's an example of how you lose an election. Do you realize he built over 4,000 homes for Americans? He didn't cry and start no January the 6th. He started building homes he was building houses, putting nails in the and foundations at 90 years old.
Yeah, and if Reagan hadn't cut a deal with the Ayatollah to hold on to the American hostages, Jimmy Carter would have been president.
Right.
He was very popular.
And he didn't cry about that.
Right. Well, I don't think he knew about it. I think he suspected it, but he didn't have proof. The proof, we now have the proof.
4,000 homes?
Yeah.
You realize he built 4,000
I know,
homes?
Habitat for Humanity. God bless him. The guy's a saint.
And he's the oldest living president. I think he'll be 99 years old October the 1st.
Yeah.
The oldest living president.
Yeah, God bless him.
And he's an example of how you lose an election and what you should do. Don't cry.
You mean he's an example of how to behave after you've lost an election?
Right.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Okay. I was trying to understand. Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, Gar. I'm with you. That's a great point. Thank you very much for calling and making it. Erica in Seattle. Hey, Erica, what's on your mind here?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to pivot back to that terrible situation in Maui and the fire.
Yeah.
I just recently read a piece on Democracy Now! About how the Native Hawaiian archive in Maui was completely destroyed.
Yes.
And to them, that's as important as our national archive here.
Yeah, and it went back hundreds of years. I mean, this went back to the old kingdoms of Hawaii.
Yeah, and it's awful. And I would like to see, other than in, alternative news, more mainstream coverage about the Native perspective on what is happening there. And also, there is a connection between overdevelopment, climate change, and this fire. And it would be, I'd like to see more of that mentioned in mainstream news as well. I don't think that's getting enough coverage.
I've seen a fairly frequent mention of climate change on MSNBC. It's pretty much the only network when I watch TV that I watch any longer. But yeah, they've done a really good job of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was also a really good coverage about it on Democracy Now! About where they interviewed a fire expert that talked about the native vegetation changes that helped fuel the wildfires.
Yeah, the invasive grasses that then dried out and became tinder. Yeah, you're right. Erica, thank you. Yeah, spot on. We do need to be talking about this more. I completely agree. I also watch Free Speech TV, I should add. I didn't mean to diss free speech. Oh, my God. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So why is it that Republicans insist on calling Democrats communists? I mean, this is all over the place. You know, Donald Trump recently said, we're going to deny entry all communists and Marxists. Now, the real problem is, what do we do about the ones we already have who happen to be politicians? Nancy Pelosi, Schumer, Shifty Schiff. Ted Cruz told Fox News, Joe Biden has handed the agenda over to the socialists. And not just the socialists, this is now the communists. Today's Democratic Party believes in violence. They believe in mob rule, just like the communists and Marxists. And he goes on. Ron DeSantis, same thing. You see at a college campus, students flying the hammer and sickle from the old Soviet Union flag. There are no communists left in America of any consequence. There's certainly not a single elected communist. But we do have a really serious fascism problem in America. I wrote about this over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Why American Fascists Label All Who Oppose Them as Communists. Check it out. "24 minutes past the hour, and this just in, Georgia prosecutors have texts directly linking Team Trump to the breach of the voting machines, per CNN. This has got Donald Trump he's got his panties in a wad. I'll tell you, he is hysterical about this. He's been tweeting terrible things about Fani Willis, saying that she was having an affair with a gang member that she was prosecuting. It's a complete lie. He's just gone off the deep edge. He's not going after Judge Chutkin because she's threatened him. Now he's going after Fani Willis. It's incredible. So but what it looks like is they've got emails and text messages connecting Rudy Giuliani to the Coffee County, Georgia elections office, where they actually broke into a voting machine, thinking that they would, I don't know what they thought they'd find, a little man in there moving votes from one side to the other. So whatever. But they're going after that. Meanwhile, this is particularly interesting. Fulton County, for about 10 minutes, had on their website, in the Fulton County website, their court's website, a 2-page docket posted, apparently accidentally, that showed multiple charges being filed against Donald Trump. Racketeering, conspiracy, and making false statements. So they're kind of getting a little ahead of themselves, but interesting. So stay tuned, as they say in the radio business. Finally, the alternative energy future is arriving sooner than advertised, writes Critical Mind over on Daily Kos. America represents, roughly a quarter of the world's economy, maybe a little less depending on how you calculate it. And worldwide, this year, we're expecting a $1 trillion investment in fossil fuels, but a $1.7 trillion investment in renewable energy. A third of new energy generated in Britain is renewable. 23% of energy in the United States is expected to be renewable this year. 23%. A decade ago, it was only 10%. 2/3 of the new investment in clean energy right now, most of it coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act, is going into red states, into Republican-controlled states. Tulsa, Oklahoma, the oil capital of the world. The Public Service Company of Oklahoma generates 28% of its power from wind. A electric vehicle startup is building a 10,000 square foot battery factory in Oklahoma City. Houston, 500 oil and gas companies, 130 alternative energy companies. It's here, my friends.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Of course, the oil companies seem to be just backing away from green energy. They're tripling down on poisoning the planet. I'll pick up your calls after the break.
Hartman University Book Club. Today we're reading from Legacy of Secrecy, The Long Shadow of the JFK Assassination by Lamar Waldron and me. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963 triggered cover-ups by officials, this is from the introduction, by the way, that continue to negatively impact American politics, life, and foreign policy. Legacy of Secrecy details those cover-ups and hidden investigations, many for the first time, including the reasons they were carried out under such intense secrecy. Most were spawned by John and Robert Kennedy's top-secret 1963 plan to stage a coup against Fidel Castro, a plan so highly classified that it only started to be exposed in 2005 and is finally revealed in this book. Their own confessions now show that three mafia bosses, Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, and Johnny Roselli, were behind JFK's assassination. They used parts of the secret coup plan to kill JFK in a way that forced Attorney General Robert Kennedy, President Lyndon B. Johnson, excuse me, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and high CIA official Richard Helms to withhold critical information not only from the public and the press, but also from each other and sometimes their own investigators. It's important to keep in mind that JFK was murdered just a year after the tense nuclear standoff during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The main goals of U.S. officials were to prevent a nuclear confrontation with the Soviets and to protect JFK's ally high up in the Cuban government, Commander Juan Almeida, head of the Cuban Army in 1963, still listed as Cuba's #3 official today. While U.S. leaders have managed to prevent a confrontation with Russia and preserve a critical ally in the Cuban government, this limited the investigation into JFK's murder, allowing the three mafia chiefs and their associates to remain free. As a result, the long shadow of secrecy surrounding both JFK's murder and the coup plan set the stage for the murder of Martin Luther King, ultimately driving 2 presidents from office and bringing about the murders of 5 congressional witnesses in the mid-1970s. Legacy of Secrecy breaks excuse me, important new ground in key areas, detailing for the first time Louisiana godfather Carlos Marcello's clear confession to ordering JFK's assassination. Marcello's criminal empire ranged from Dallas to Memphis, and previously secret files at the National Archives have shown that he made this confession in 1985 to an FBI informant ruled credible by a federal judge as part of a secret FBI undercover sting operation named Camtex. Exposed here for the first time, Camtex yielded Marcello's admission that he'd met Lee Harvey Oswald and set Jack Ruby up in business in Dallas. The operation also generated hundreds of hours of heretofore secret prison audio tapes of Marcello discussing his crimes, recorded using the FBI informant's bugged transistor radio. Yet the FBI and Justice Department withheld most of that information from the public and Congress for years until its revelation in this book. Carlos Marcello wasn't the only mob boss who confessed his involvement in JFK's murder to a trusted associate. Legacy also uncovers important new information about Marcello's partners in JFK's assassination, Tampa godfather Santos Trafficante and Johnny Roselli, the Chicago Mafia's man in Las Vegas and Hollywood. Shortly before their deaths, both mobsters admitted their roles in JFK's murder to their attorneys. 2 of their associates with documented ties to the secret JFK Almeida coup plan likewise confessed. Using exclusive new information supported by FBI files apparently withheld from Congress, this book names 2 of the Georgia men who paid James Earl Ray to kill the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, white supremacist Joseph Miltier and Hugh R. Spake. Miltier, who had been involved in Marcello's murder of JFK, was part of a small clique of racists in Atlanta who used Marcello to broker the contract to murder Dr. King. We document James to Marcello's heroin smuggling operation and long overlooked evidence in FBI files linking Ray to Marcello's associate, Johnny Roselli. Finally, this book explains why Ray, while fleeing to Canada the day after killing Dr. King in Memphis, made a 400-plus mile detour south to Atlanta, where he contacted Spake to get help from Miltier. In 1979, the last congressional committee to investigate the murders of JFK and Dr. King, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, concluded, quote, that Trafficante, like Marcello, had the motive, means, and opportunity to assassinate President Kennedy, end of quote from the congressional report. The HSCA had been created in the wake of Roselli's sensational murder, but the HSCA was unable to establish direct evidence of Marcello's complicity. And the same was true for Trafficante and Roselli, because the CIA, FBI, and other federal agencies withheld so many relevant files. The HSCA, headed by civil rights figure Louis Stokes, also concluded there was a likelihood of conspiracy in the assassination of Dr. King and that financial gain was James Earl Ray's primary motivation. but they were unable to determine who had paid Ray or how the conspiracy had worked because the FBI and other agencies had hid critical files. With the help of more than 24 associates of John and Robert Kennedy, backed up by thousands of recently released documents at the National Archives, many of which are quoted here for the first time, Legacy tells the full story denied to Congress and the American people, legacy of secrecy.
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. Recently, I did an op-ed and a little rant here about what happens when you raise the top income tax rate on morbidly rich people to 90%, and how, that helps reduce income inequality and funds the government, all kinds of good positive things. What about corporate taxes? We really need to go back to the 50% top corporate income tax rate that we had under Dwight Eisenhower, for example. The reason why is not on the assumption that we're going to collect all that money, but what it does is it causes corporations to change their behavior, to do things to try to get tax deductions so they don't have to pay that in taxes. And what are the main things they do? They develop new products. They do research and development. They become more competitive. They open up new stores. They pay their employees better. They offer better benefits. All of these things are 100% tax deductible and thus lower their corporate income taxes and help out America. You can read all about it over at HartmannReport.com. 35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. David in Sarasota, Florida. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. So what I was going to say is, you said earlier that Russia and Saudi Arabia want to cut production. I was going to say that's more reason to push for your ideal of banning the export of oil produced in the United States.
Yeah,
and,
I agree.
Right. So, anyways, I don't know how far that's going in Congress, but maybe we should get Ziggy to produce a sticker with Putin and MSSB saying we did this.
Yeah, you're right. We really, and by the way, just as much as it pains me to say it, it was the Biden administration, or excuse me, it was the Obama administration that ended that rule. And, it used to be illegal to export. In fact, it was put into place by Richard Nixon in 72 or 73, right after the Arab oil embargo. It used to be illegal to export unrefined petroleum products. And, Obama changed the rules and let us export it. And so, because we were energy independent there for a while. I mean, we were producing all the oil we needed. But now we're shipping it to other countries, and as a result of that, we're dependent upon Saudi oil again, and that allows the Saudis to control the price of oil in the United States. If we had our own internal oil market, we could decouple from the world oil markets, and we could set our own prices. So yeah, David, excellent point. Thank you very much for calling and making it. Suzanne in Dublin, Ohio. Hey, Suzanne, what's on your mind today? Suzanne, listening on the Thom Hartmann app?
Oh, can you hear me? Sorry, I had mute pushed.
That's quite all right. I can hear you now.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say I love your conversation with the right-leaning Gavin. We need more of that today in our society.
Yeah, God bless him.
Yes, and you, your knowledge to discuss it. But what I'm calling about is every time you play that FDR recording, I chuckle. We will miss you very much because it gives me 2 or 3 thoughts that are connected. I hope I can get them in before I get cut off. Mm-hmm. And that is, it's one of the reasons we broke. Well, first of all, our political system is what allows those billionaires to become billionaires. If they had lived back in the days of the monarchy, they wouldn't have been able to do that. Or if they moved to a dictatorship country, they wouldn't have been able to do that because the government would have taken most of their money.
Right.
And I'm losing all my thoughts, but then it reminds me of a quote that I once heard, and that was, today's monarchs, or today's CEOs are yesterday's monarchs.
There you go.
You know, they take all the money. They don't want to pay tax dollars to support our infrastructure that they use, our highways and everything, plus so many things you hit on, and that is to have it fair play so that people have benefits that need them. But anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Oh, it is a new monarchy. And for people who don't know the clip that you're talking about, Suzanne, let me just play it here for you and for everybody else. This is Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
A number of my friends who belong in these very high upper brackets have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am reelected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
It's called calling their bluff, Suzanne. Yeah.
I love it. I even laughed again as I heard it. Thank you.
Suzanne, thanks for the call.
Okay.
Yeah. Terry in Nixon, Missouri. Hey, Terry, what's on your mind today?
Tom.
Hey, Terry.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can you hear me? Well, the gentleman from New York that you were talking to who couldn't explain why he was a Republican. You know, I live in the reddest part of Missouri, and there's not a one Republican who can explain to me why they are Republicans around here. It's just that they're not Democrats.
Yeah. It's kind of a tribal thing, you think? These are my peeps.
It's you know, where I live in Nixa, the home of Jason Bourne, of course, you know, it used to be, you know, we were 50-50. Missouri had, you know,
Harry Truman came from Missouri.
Democratic. Pardon?
Harry Truman came from Missouri. Franklin Roosevelt's vice president.
Yeah, Stuart Symington and Ted Long were, you know, senators when I was growing up. I mean, we had, you know, Democratic governors, Democratic senators, and I don't know what has changed over the last 20 years or 25 years, but
I can tell you one thing that's changed, Terry, is that Missouri is now peppered with radio stations that are broadcasting right-wing talk radio 24/7, and this has been going on since the late 80s, early 90s. And there's not a single, to the best of my knowledge, not a single progressive radio station in Missouri. And that has an impact. That really does have an impact.
Well, that's why I have satellite radio, just so I can listen to you.
There you go, guys.
And, you know, the other progressives.
Yep. Yeah, I see you're listening on Sirius XM. And that's the thing. I mean, you know, people in Missouri, they can catch us on Free Speech TV on their cable systems, on some cable systems. And they can catch us on Sirius XM. But if you're just driving down the road without a Sirius satellite receiver, it's going to be all right-wing all the time. And you know, you listen to enough of that stuff and it starts to sink in. You know, when I lived in Atlanta back in the 80s, I used to listen to Neil Bortz and Rush Limbaugh because that's all that was on the air. And I remember on occasion thinking, maybe he's got a point there. So, you know, the media is a big deal. So anyhow, Terry, thank you for the call. I appreciate it. Diane in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Diane, thanks for listening to WMNF. What's on your mind today?
Well, there's several things. I'll make it simple, though. My husband and I owned a pharmacy, and when the Democrats were in power, I could get in contact with a social worker and get a $10 antibiotic for a kid that didn't have enough money for his family to pay for it. It took a bit of work, and I had to go to the social worker's office, but that $10 antibiotic probably saved a bill from the emergency room. But as soon as Bush got in, he ran an audit on all of us, including a smaller chain called Eckerd's, and he put almost everybody out of business by fining them for doing something that you can do in pharmacy, which is changing the strength of the medication. And he would try to charge you for the half that you could not use. It was complicated. Let's just put it this way.
So this is, if I can interrupt you for a second, so what you're talking about is, you know, somebody's got a prescription for 10 milligram medication, and what you can do is give them 20 milligrams and say cut the pills in half, But the 20 milligram bottle of pills is not twice as expensive as the 10 milligram. It's only 30% more expensive. So you end up saving money by cutting them in half. Is that what you're talking about?
No, it's actually different. It's a pharmacy audit. It was purposely set out to try to get money for the state when Bush came in. And what it is, say, I'm a small person. I'll keep it short. So I usually have to take half a dose of a normal person. So, you know, maybe the doctor would write for 20 and I'd get half of them, and then Tom would call and I'd still have the whole bottle. But he would drop it to 10, and then they would want to charge you for the medication that you didn't use.
Right.
They were trying to do it by saying you didn't always give all the medication to. Anyway, it got complicated, but we had good works. The audit was set out to do what it did, which was eliminate most of the independents in the independent chain. But, you know, we hung on, and we also delivered to homes. We did blister packing where you pick out each pill so you know whether the elderly person has taken it or not.
Yep.
We help a lot of people with their medication. Now I go to Walgreens, and they do the best they can, but they cannot do the service we did because we cared about our people.
That's right.
They have to answer to Walgreens stockholders.
Yep.
The money we made and the way we made our money was a lot of work. And one of the biggest things that cost us was insurance. So we'd have to hire somebody whose husband was a postman or a policeman, or, you know, husband had a good job because the insurance was killing us. And that's one of the reasons they're killing off small business now.
Right.
And one of the things that people don't understand, let's just say there's 15 small businesses in your community. That's 150 employees if you have 10 for each business. And that money stays in the community.
That's right.
Especially
if you've got a local bank.
It doesn't go to Washington, D.C. or New York or some... And this is a little off the subject, but Bill Gates came down here and gave us some money, and then he took it back, and our kids had to spend 2 years with no air conditioning in some of our schools because education system.
We're kind of wandering all over the place here, Diana. But the one point that you made, I just want to emphasize, when a Walmart, typically a Walmart will replace about 100 local businesses. And when a Walmart moves into a community, at the end of every night, your local businesses took their money down to the local bank, which then would use that money to loan out to people to buy houses or start new businesses. At the end of every night in every Walmart in America, the manager pushes a button, and all the money that came in that day, boom, goes right to Bentonville, Arkansas, where the richest family in America, the Walton family, you know, takes their piece of it. So I'm with you. This destruction of American small business that began intentionally with Ronald Reagan is not a good thing.
Other thing real quick is also these people end up in the emergency room because they don't have the flexibility to find medicine for people now like we used to.
Yeah, I get it. And no, the old-fashioned pharmacies were a sight. They're wonderful things. They really were. Diane, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You know, I get it that sometimes I sound like an there's old-fashioned pharmacies. But, you know, neoliberalism really did screw up this country. And welcome back. And Lawrence in Berkeley, California. Hey, Lawrence, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, you're talking about guaranteed income.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to talk about what will happen to what people will do when AI and robots have taken over most of our jobs and we all have guaranteed income, and what can happen if we've gotten rid of the Republicans by that time, is that people will be engaged in neighborhood mutual aid. They will be helping each other.
Yeah, well, let me add to that, if I may, Lawrence, and then you can go off on your riff. If you go back and look at what happened in the Renaissance, not the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, the very first time, because a third of Europe died from the Black Plague, suddenly workers were getting paid really large quantities of money, the first unions, the guilds. And what happened was the arts flourished because people had spare time. That's when you saw this explosion of literature and art and music. Back to you.
Yes. But the mutual aid will be of various kinds. People will help each other personally. Help, I need a plumber. Help, I need a car repairer. But it will also be groups. We'll get 10 people together and put in a garden. That used to happen in Berkeley. When we had People's Park in Berkeley, when we still had only one person working for an income. After 69, there were about 20 different People's Parks.
I was there in 68 in People's Park in Berkeley.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was more than one, but I was there one day.
Yeah, but people don't realize that there were People's Parks all over the city.
Yeah.
And because people had time to be able to do that. And we will have these mutual gardens in our backyards and in public spaces. We will have all kinds of reading clubs and meditation clubs and sports games.
A reflowering of society, of culture.
Exactly. That is what can happen, as a result of AI and robots taking over the work, is that we will all help each other. And as you say, in the Renaissance, we will also be doing an enormous amount of art. People will be doing public art like they did then, art on walls.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to prepare for this by having a progressive society. And if we do, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's going to be contingent on UBI or something like it. And I think that we saw a good chunk of this. It's just kind of fading out now because it's been, about 6 months since the child tax credit went away? But, and there are some people who claim that this is one of the things that's driving inflation. I'm not buying that. But we had, middle-class America was able to take a breath for a year or so as a result of that expanded child tax credit.
Yeah. In 71, when we still, when you only needed one person as, giving an income, I created an organization that I called the Neighborhood Village. Mm-hmm. And we did that. And I'm now 80 years old. I can't organize that anymore.
Well, we can still do a lot, Lawrence, in our old age here. Lawrence, I got to run, but thank you for the call, and thank you in particular for that point. I mean, I talked about UBI, but I didn't talk about where does this lead? What societal upside does it provide beyond the individual upside? And you provided that last missing piece of the puzzle. I'm very grateful to you for that. Thank you. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. It's 9 minutes before the hour. Picking up your calls here. Marvin in Skokie, Illinois. Hey, Marvin, what's on your mind today?
Hi there. I've been listening to you since Air America was founded, and I thank you for good information.
You're welcome.
Tom, you spoke about UBI earlier in the show, and I would like to see a campaign started from your program for a robotics tax to fund the UBI nationally, a sovereign wealth fund which got its money from a robotics tax. You said automation is making companies richer, so let's skim a little of that off. And I think it would be easier to collect than any other proposal that was made for UBI. I
understand your argument, Marvin. I don't agree with it, and if I could respectfully lay out why. Louise and I have started a bunch of businesses in our lives, and typically the first couple of years when you start a business from scratch, you make no money. I mean, you look at my Social Security statements, and I've got all these 2- and 3-year chunks where I literally had no income at all. It was zero. So if you're taxing the product that I'm using, the tool that I'm using, if I was to start a new business and I had, robotic checkout counters or I had robotic manufacturing, and you're going to tax me on that before I've even made a profit, then it's going to discourage me from starting that business. It's going to make it a lot harder to start that business, and it's going to make it so only the big guys could get in. Well, let me finish. So instead of that, what I'm suggesting is that we could fund this with a tax on profits, which is called the income tax. And, we've got your average billionaire in America is only paying 3.4% income tax in the United States. They should be paying the same as everybody else. In fact, frankly, I think they should be paying more than everybody else. And you've got companies in America that are showing huge $100 billion, multi-billion-dollar profits and paying no income tax whatsoever because there's all these loopholes in the tax code. I think if we just cleaned up the tax code, Marvin, we could fund a UBI without any problem.
All right, let's launch a campaign to clean up the tax code.
There you go. Okay, thank you, Marvin. I'm glad I could convince you. Appreciate the call. Travis in Syracuse, New York. Hey, Travis, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I want to talk about the UBI also.
Go for it.
So it's a kind of about a fairness thing. So you laid out that under 30,000 people were able to get the one program that they tried. It was about $800 a month, so about $10,000 a year.
Right.
So I was just thinking that it kind of alienates, the people making from $30,000 to $40,000.
Yep.
Just to sharpen it up to make it more fair, because I think in this day and age, I think anything under $35,000 a year, people are struggling with the cost of everything.
We're already sort of doing this, Travis. We're just doing it in a way that's completely scattershot. And we're doing it in a way, frankly, that subsidizes low-income employers. Walmart tells people how to apply for food stamps and housing assistance, and how to apply for Medicaid. Those are all basically subsidies to big corporations that pay crappy wages. So we need to get that under control, first of all. And then secondly, I'm of the opinion, and I'm saying this as an employer myself, and I've been an employer for over 50 years, that if you have a business model where you can't pay your workers a living wage, a decent wage, you don't have a business model. And we should just say that right up front. If you can't pay, if you got to pay your workers $7, $8, $10 an hour in order to be able to make your business work, you're in the wrong business. We just shouldn't have businesses like that. You look at other countries. Denmark, the minimum wage is $18 an hour. And you've got really high, like 80% unionization. So they don't have a need for a UBI because they have very little poverty.
No, I understand. I think it's just it's a fairness thing where I'm completely with the Democrats, and it's just seems like some people get alienated from some of the programs. They're kind of like
I agree. And then you get people like Ronald Reagan coming along on the campaign trail and saying, doesn't it upset you when a young buck is standing in front of you in line at the supermarket and paying for his steak and champagne with his food stamps? And of course, young buck being code for black man. You've got Republicans.
They know how to exploit anything.
Yeah, there you go. Travis, thank you for the call. I get it, how, the politics of this and the emotions around it as well. We really need to have a national conversation about what to do about poverty and work in America. We really do. And work something out of it. Hey, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. That includes you. So get out there, get active. There's so much we can do. There's so much you can do. Tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter